Hi, heathens. So, welcome to my very first ever live stream. Anything could happen. Tonight, I am super excited to have Ben here with me. Many of y'all will know him from the Real Atheology podcast, or from Twitter, or from, I don't know what else, probably some other cool things that he does. And he and I are going to discuss something that I am actually quite ignorant about. So I am incredibly excited to learn and to nod vigorously along like I understand whether or not I actually do. We also have Correa here, who has generously hopped on to be the voice of reason. No.
We're in trouble then.
And so, yeah, so to get started, I don't want to say accidentally, but kind of by happy accident, came across Ben on Twitter. And sort of, sorry, I was echoing there for a second.
I fixed it.
Okay, sorry. I came across him on Twitter. And contrary to popular belief, I actually really enjoy people that handle problems and issues differently than I do, because it certainly takes all kinds. So where I might just give someone the finger, it's lovely when people actually take the time to educate, when people might actually listen to them, right? Because they have the background or the social capital or whatever you want to call it. So I was pleasantly surprised to see Ben and to see Real Atheology and to see Ryan. And from there, I feel like I've learned a lot just reading his tweets. And when he signed up to want to chat with me, I was, to be honest, a little intimidated because I was like, I don't know that I can ask smart questions. This is way out of my depth. But I'm super glad you're here. So, Ben, will you please tell us a little bit more about yourself, your background, however much or as much or as little as you want to share, and then what first got you interested in philosophy of religion, and then maybe for the ignorant among us, define philosophy of religion for the people.
Sure. So my name's Benjamin Blakespeed Watkins. That is my real name. My parents were just eccentric like that. But it's super helpful when you have a podcast because it makes you really easily Googleable. If that, I just made that a word. And so I grew up in a very conservative, Quaker-like home in the South. And so kind of in my coming of age, I went to college and got an engineering degree. And then when I kind of set out into the real world, I was like, hey, how do I start a life? Like, how do I manage a budget? And do I go to church? These were just questions that I was just like, I guess it's time to try to answer these things. And as I started asking questions, more questions started to arise, and I just kind of started going down the rabbit hole. And so those initial questions are kind of what got me into what's known as the philosophy of religion. And so the philosophy of religion has been around for millennia in the sense that it just uses our human capacities for natural reason, things like evidence and introspection and things like that, to ask big questions about religion. And one of the central concepts in religion is obviously God. So one of the big questions is, does God exist? And if so, can we have a reasonable basis for it? Or do we need something like faith? Is something more needed? So the question of reason versus faith, that's another big question in the philosophy of religion. And so I started a podcast, and that's kind of how the Real Atheology project started off, is because we wanted to seriously explore questions in the philosophy of religion from non-theist perspectives, because we felt like this was kind of a hole in the online philosophy or great debate community, is that there just wasn't really serious engagement with the history of philosophy and what serious analytic philosophy can look like from an atheist perspective, because there is an entire apologetics establishment and for lack of a better term, a propaganda machine that just really churns out and there is no equivalent on the religious skeptic side of things. And so we're trying to fill that void with our project.
Yeah, I think I guess I personally never really thought about it, only because, well, I think there's a lot of reasons, largely because the household that I grew up in was incredibly conservative, but also this is going to sound terrible, also wasn't incredibly bright, not gonna lie. So they're not thinking about the deeper things, right? They've sort of committed a priori to something. This is what I believe, and the only things that I want to hear are things that support that. And actually, the only things that I want to hear that support that are like not these more cerebral sort of ways of thinking or concepts, right? It's very like, did this happen? Yes or no? Was there a talking donkey? Yes or no? Can I prove that the flood happened? Yes or no? And so my path was very different. And obviously I don't do philosophy of religion, but it's different in the way that I sort of thought like, okay, my dad was very into like apologetics, Norman Geisler, all this, whatever. And so when I was struggling with my faith, I was like, well, it seems like you can prove the Bible, right? You can prove that these historical events happened. So like, I'm just going to go do the research. I'm going to find the scholarship, and then I will be able to sort of, even if I don't feel God or whatever, I can sort of arm myself with those things, and I'll just accept that it's true. So it's interesting to me when I hear folks talk more about these like high level, I don't know, schools of thought or thought processes or just like concepts. Not that like archaeology and history can't be high level, but it's just very different. Because instead of talking about did A, B, or C happen, we're now talking about like what are the sort of underpinnings of belief? What can we reason? At least that's what it seems like. Yeah, I'm really not going anywhere with that. Just that I think it's really interesting. And then,
Sure.
It is.
As I've gotten older, I'm like, what?
It's interesting because, like, for me, it was very different because even when I was a Christian, I believed that that faith was a solely emotionally based experience. Right. That I thought that that's just how the Holy Spirit worked. He worked through your subconscious and your emotions. And so I never held it against other people like who were atheists for because I was like, well, the Holy Spirit hasn't shown up, like they haven't felt him in the same way that I have, and I'm not going to hold that against them.
To be honest.
Yeah, so I was like, oh, okay, well, that's just like how the Holy Spirit works, is through our emotions. And so like when I became an atheist, it was like, that was like, because things weren't making sense, but the longest or the hardest part for me was letting go of that emotional need for a God, like that need of believing that there was something out there taking care of me.
Yeah.
That was the last part of my deconstruction before I was like, I am an atheist.
Well, I think it's also very interesting, and you'll have to forgive me. I know you said you came from a conservative family. I don't remember exactly what religious sect you said you were a part of. Was it?
It's a Quaker-like sect.
Quaker. Okay, that's what I thought,
Yeah.
and I was like, right. I almost said Mennonite. Anyway, I grew up incredibly charismatic, so this like very feeling-based faith or faith denomination. And I've always been the way that I am. So feelings weren't really getting me anywhere because I was like, I don't feel jack shit except for hungry and tired of this church service. And like, I would like it to be over because charismatic services last forever. Anyway, so yeah, sorry. Any chance I can talk about my charismatic upbringing, I'm going to take it. But I digress. So tell us, so when you signed up to talk to me, which is funny to me that anybody signs up to talk to me, you were saying that you were going to talk about the argument from imperfection. And to be honest, again, the first thing that I kind of thought was like, well, do you just make up things in philosophy? Like, I don't know, not make them up, but like, are there like existing sort of frameworks? Sorry, that sounded really rude. That's not what I meant. But like, are there existing sort of frameworks that you use to think like through things? Or if you're a philosopher, for lack of a better term, you're like, I'm going to make an argument from, and then you just sort of decide. Look, I told you I don't know anything. Okay, please.
I'm
No, it's
sorry,
great.
I'm sorry.
It's great. Because
Explain to me like I'm 5.
most people, this is where most people start off with, because they kind of think, like, well, what do you do? Do you just like kind of bullshit your way into a
Just like
conclusion?
thinking about things, like I don't
And,
know.
or are there more objective ways of thinking about these big questions? And it turns out that there are objective ways of thinking about these questions, in the sense that there are models, there are roadmaps in the history of philosophy that help us see different points more clear than others. And so most people, if they're familiar at all with the philosophy of a religion, are already at least partly familiar with the argument I'm putting forward tonight, and they've just heard it as the argument from evil. This is kind of known as the bane of theism. It's just this idea that the kinds, amounts, and distributions of evils in the world just are evidence against a perfect being like God. But so why do I call it the argument from imperfection? Am I just trying to, sound quirky or, put a stamp on it? And the broad answer is no. I want to expand the argument from evil, because there's a newer argument on the scene that's called the argument from divine hiddenness, the idea that God's not as obvious as he could be. And so I want to say that one of the interesting distinctions in the argument from imperfection is that there are epistemic and practical imperfections. The epistemic imperfection being God is not that as obvious as it could be, and the practical consideration being that the world could be better than it is. The world is obviously not a perfect world that we would expect if it was created by a being with the power and the motivation to create a perfect world. And so this is a really, really powerful argument. And why is that? So to kind of back up a little bit, to give a little bit of the history of philosophy here.
Hi, Josh.
One of the things that I really encourage atheists to do is to give arguments for their beliefs about God, and to not just say that they lack a belief in theism, but to actually say, no, theism is false, and we have evidence that theism is false. And so there's 3 broad kinds of arguments. And so the first is that theism is unnecessary. So the famous example of this is Laplace. Laplace is writing around the time after Newton and of Napoleon. Napoleon famously invites him to show him his model of the solar system. And so Laplace shows Napoleon his model of the solar system. And Napoleon says, look, I'm very impressed with everything you've been able to do, but it seems you've left God out. And so Laplace is kind of offended by the remark from Napoleon. And so he quips back to him, I had no need of that hypothesis.
Bitch.
And so, yeah. So the point that Laplace is making is that, look, there is no fact about the world in which we need God to explain it. We can have models of the world, of every feature of the world, from consciousness to the cosmos, and we don't need to invoke a God. So that's one really powerful line of argument. The second is a natural history of religion. So Nietzsche famously does this. And so let's imagine that I said to you, hey, let's go to Hogwarts. And you kind of look at me and you're like, dude, Hogwarts is from Harry Potter. Like that's,
awesome.
It's the fiction of an author. And so you would give his natural history of Harry Potter and how Hogwarts came about, and that this would be sufficient to say, look, dude, there is no Hogwarts. We can't go to Hogwarts. It's a fiction. That's what a natural history.
Wait, are you going to wait?
You just crushed Korea's dreams, please.
I know.
I
haven't gotten my letter yet, so either I'm like an antagonist in this story, or there is no Hogwarts.
I am Dudley, apparently. So.
But the third kind is the most powerful kind, and it's the idea that, look, natural theology fails. Natural theology being the project in philosophy of trying to use human reason to establish the existence of God. So this would be contrast with like revealed religion, the idea that, like, hey, we have knowledge of God through a revelation. We should be able to put all revelations aside, look at the world, and infer God from it.
Yeah. I love the revelation argument that people use, because nobody's revelation agrees with anyone else's revelation. So
that's what the project of natural theology is meant to solve. It's supposed to say, look, okay, there's these mutually incompatible revelations, and they, their own contradictions destroy one another. And so we want something more objective, something more fair. We don't want to just bullshit our way to the conclusion. We want to give an argument with premises that support their conclusions. And so natural theology tries to do that by saying that, look, there's this necessary cause and designer of our world that has infinite powers and is perfectly moral motivations. And so they do that traditionally with things like the ontological argument and the cosmological argument and design arguments. But the problem comes in once we get to the point of infinite power and moral perfection.
By the way, God exists.
Yeah. And so even if we were to grant the ontological argument, the cosmological argument, and the design argument, all the way up to that, the argument from imperfection blocks the project of natural theology and says, look, when we look at the world and we see the imperfections, the best that we can infer from it is that a God is indifferent to our suffering. And he might be like a watchmaker, a tinkerer who just kind of sets the universe into play and lets it go off on its own. Well, that's not the type of thing that would respond to our religious concerns.
Right.
We wouldn't say that something like that is wholly worthy of our worship, or we had reason to think that it would answer our prayers, or that our salvation could depend on something like this, or that it could fulfill, our desires like a life after death. You don't get any of that from looking at the world. And that's where the argument from imperfection comes in.
Yeah. I mean, I think fundamentally, so I certainly would never be able to explain it that eloquently or that with that much information. But I think it's something probably a lot of us have felt, where it's like, how in the fuck is there a perfect being, all loving, omnibenevolent, omniscient, yada, 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 yada. And yet this is what we're living in, this bullshit. Like this.
Yeah.
Well, that's what, so we've got a question from one of the people in the audience, Theophilus. I don't know if I'm pronouncing your name correctly. If I'm not, I apologize. My name's Correa. People butcher it all the time. But saying atheists giving explanations for God, wouldn't that make them theists?
No, not if they're philosophers. So philosophers try on different ideas without accepting them. And so what they do is that they try to take the strongest arguments on the opposing side and to see what follows from it, and let the evidential chips fall where they may. And so what's so strong about the argument from imperfection is that we can grant all of the arguments that thus exist in natural theology. We can grant them all. And we still block the conclusion to the God of traditional monotheism with an argument from imperfection. So the argument from imperfection, in a real sense, gets the last word for our question of reason versus faith. The argument from imperfection basically gives the natural theologian a dilemma. Either you embrace that this project is a failure and you resort back to revelation, or you have what's called Panglossian optimism. What on earth does that mean?
Yes, please. So again, I saw this on my Twitter feed a lot today, and I was like, oof.
So Leibniz is a famous theistic philosopher, and he famously coined the term the best of all possible worlds, that the world, that the actual world that we live in is the best of all possible worlds. And that might seem like a crazy claim, because it is. That's what Panglossian optimism is. Voltaire famously parodied Leibniz's thought in a play called Candide, and one of the characters, Pangloss, is just kind of the bumbling idiot of the play who thinks that everything is all for the best because this is the best possible world. And so the Lisbon earthquake happens, and he's like, well, it's all for the best.
God has a plan.
Because that's literally the arguments that they'll make, is that like intelligent design requires an intelligent designer, and that like they'll be like saying like, well, look at the trees, and it's like, okay, let's actually look at the fact that our sun gives us cancer, and like that this isn't the best like possible world that we could have.
And
Also,
that's the big driving point of the satire, is that
Theophilus. Yes, that's all. Sorry, I can't get through a stream without poking fun at like 1 or 5 apologists. Can't ever. But anyway, let's get back to the to the question at hand. Yeah, so I guess like, oh yeah, hey Biddy. I always find it really, what's a nice word for annoying? Interesting when people, like, okay, I don't mean to like bring the mood down, right? But I think most people that have followed me for a while know that when I was 21, my partner killed himself. And it was, horrendous, as you would expect. And people would still tell me, like, effectively everything happens for a reason. And like, God will use this, right? And it's like, what? Like,
but they'll
what are you
also,
talking about?
in another breath, tell you that God gave us free will, and that
Right.
we can make choices in ways that He can't influence at all. And so that's incompatible. Obviously, very sorry to hear about your partner at that age.
Thank you.
That would have been a free choice on his part.
Right.
That's not something that God caused to happen. So to then say that it's part of His providential plan doesn't really. There's an obvious tension there.
Yeah. Well, I feel like things often fall apart when you're talking about like, okay, so God knit us together in our womb, knowing every single thing we would do before, we died. But also He gave us free will. How do you have free will if God has preordained what's going to happen effectively, right? Like it doesn't. I just don't understand how you.
One of the things that like started my deconstruction process was I don't remember who said it, but at some point I was like watching something or reading something, and someone said that that we're a society that is obsessed with control, and that's a really big problem because we can only control about 5% of our life. Everything else is out of our control. We don't decide like who our parents are, like where we grew up, the kind of environment, like psychological, like we don't decide our genetics, we don't decide the psychological trauma that we're going to endure. And so it really made me start thinking about how, like, if a God is good and a God is loving and a God is just, why would He give an infinite like consequence for a finite life where I can only control 5% of it? Like, how does a loving God do like, it was the philosophy that just started not making sense to me. I'm going, wait a minute.
So the pinned tweet on my Twitter is my reflections on this very point. And the tweet reads, let's just suppose that God exists. And the first premise is we act as we do because of how God created us. And then the second premise is we cannot deserve punishment from God unless we can be ultimately responsible for how God created us. And then the final premise is we cannot be ultimately responsible for how God created us. Therefore, we cannot deserve punishment from God. And to me, this is just kind of an airtight argument in the sense that all three of those premises just seem straightforwardly true. And all three of them entail the conclusion that we can't deserve punishment from God. God created us with the natures that we have, and our natures are what determine our actions. So if we're going to be responsible for
Eve ate the apple, Ben.
Yeah, it's
okay, please.
God created Eve in such a way that she would choose to eat an apple.
Well, and that's the other part is like when you're talking about an omniscient, all-powerful God that knows everything about us, then like it means that He has made since the start of time trillions of people that He knew were gonna go to hell, and He made them anyway.
Yes. Now, there's certain ways out of that, or at least try to attempt that. And one of the more clever maneuvers is what's called open theism. And it's this idea that God doesn't actually have knowledge of future events. The future is genuinely open. And so that everything that happens is almost kind of like a surprise to God. But
why would you follow that guy? That fucking sucks.
Yeah. So this obviously is very repulsive to many traditional Christians because they want to say, no, God's sovereignty over creation is such that he controls it. Like nothing happens without God knowing about it. It's everything is within God's sovereign providential control over creation. But if you're going to take that stance, my tweet shows that, that rules out free will. Free will is just off the table.
Yeah. I am interested. So I have obviously the notes, like your cliff notes here. And something that I've heard people mention, and again, like, I don't know why my brain is just sort of like, when I start hearing about these sort of philosophical arguments, it's like, yeah, sorry, you don't do that. And I think it's just because I've never felt comfortable, like, really asking someone, like, okay, listen, I need you to explain this to me. Like I am 0 years old. So I'm interested in this idea about no sin in heaven, and then, like, I guess how that undercuts free will. Like, I have a general understanding, I think, but I would love to hear more about how this, expanding this.
Yeah. This is a great place to jump in. So with the argument from imperfection, the guiding intuition of that is that a perfect creator would not create anything less than a perfect world. And so that raises the philosophically interesting question of, what is a perfect world? What would it be for a perfect being to exist and then to create something separate and distinct from itself that is relatively perfect? And so the natural answer is that God would create other perfect creatures like him, and that differed only from him, only in the sense that they were created and God is uncreated. And so these perfect creatures, well, what could perfect creatures like this look like? Well, they could look like creatures that are souls, that are morally mature, and their deepest goods can be realized through their actions. And they never suffer, they never sin or otherwise experience any other evil. And so you can ask yourself, why isn't the world like that? Well, the theist is in a really awkward position here. They have to say, well, it just wasn't possible for God to create perfect creatures like that.
When are they not, to be honest?
And so the rejoinder here is very obvious, especially if they're a Christian, because they're committed to the conception of heaven. And so heaven is a place where supposedly there's free will, yet everyone always chooses right and good, realizes their deepest good, they're morally mature, and there's no suffering, sin, or evil. So it seems like it is possible to create a world, because, someone might say, well, it's impossible for God to create a world with perfect creatures because those creatures wouldn't have free will. Well, heaven's a counterexample to that, because if you say in heaven, look, you don't have free will and that's why you can't choose evil, okay, well then free will is not the great good that we thought it was.
Right.
Because one, God lacks it, and two, we don't have it in heaven, realizing our deepest goods. But then if you say, okay, well, there is free will in heaven, but there's still no suffering, sin, or evil. Okay, well, then it's possible for God to create creatures who always choose good, and for that to be genuine, those to be genuinely free actions. So heaven gives this really awkward dilemma to the theist who's trying to avoid the argument from imperfection by appealing to something like free will, or the other very popular move is soul building. This idea that, look, these evils are necessary to build up our characters. Well, one, God doesn't have to, he has a perfect character, but didn't have to suffer in order to build it up. And second of all, why can't God just create morally mature creatures from the start? Like, why do they have to go through this process of character building where they might fail? Not everyone, builds their soul in adequate ways to be worthy of relationship with God. Obviously, a lot of people just fail at it. So it seems like the world would just be better if God just created perfect creatures.
Yeah. Also, again, this is not I don't know if this is really a philosophical point, but something that I always find interesting is that theists, and especially like conservative Christian theists, have very, very strict ideas about what is good and moral, right?
Yes.
And so they've assigned moral values to things that actually are not inherently good or bad. They're not anything, right? Like the first thing that jumps to mind for me, because it's just something I grew up having it like drilled into my head, is like sex outside of marriage is bad, period. Right.
Yeah.
And as I got older and like really started thinking about the things that I was taught and like trying to parse things apart, I thought to myself, okay, what about having sex outside of marriage is actually fundamentally bad? Okay, both people consent. It's you use protection. Like there's no babies being made that aren't going to be cared for or something. Like it's simply just this act that you do that's outside the confines of a legally binding document. Like what is inherently bad about that? And the reality for me anyway that I could come up with was nothing. And so when theists or conservative Christian theists at least assign this sort of like they would choose good all of the time, right? And it's this weird circular logic where it's like, well, tell me how you then define what is good. Because really all I can tell when you say something is good is that the Bible gives it a check mark. And outside of that, like you can't tell me why it's bad or good. In the same way that like if I get up and go eat a sandwich, is that bad or good? I don't know. Like how can you assign a morality to that, right? Like I was hungry, I ate. It's what my body is designed to do. Nobody got hurt in the process. I enjoyed it. Like okay. And like I know that's a very kind of base example, but like I'm just sorry. I guess it's a very long-winded way of saying that I'm just very curious how, if we as imperfect beings are imperfect, how do we know how to define good and bad and perfect? And like, how do we even begin to understand what a perfect being is or what a perfect being does when our understanding of the world apparently is inherently flawed because of our quote sin nature, right? Like I know it's not the same across all theists, but like growing up this way, it was always bizarre to me because it's like, how are we deciding what's bad and good? Like, why does an act have this inherent morality, right? So when you get to heaven, okay, we're choosing our highest good. And apparently, according to the Bible, our highest good is just us worshiping Jesus all day long. That's it. So I guess that was, again, I'm sorry, I'm rambling a little bit, but how in the world would we as flawed beings ever be able to articulate or understand what a perfect being is or would do?
So this is a great way to segue back into the argument of perfection, because that's an imperfection of the world. Like what you're saying right now is you're like, hey, why is it the case that one, God's existence isn't more obvious to all of us? Why isn't what he expects from us, the morality of it all, why isn't that more obvious to us? And why aren't the moral fruits of theists better than, non-theists? Why is it that, there's the moral fruits of theism are meager? This is the argument for meager moral fruits. We would expect that for people to be in a relationship with a perfectly moral being who could be like a, omnisciently wise moral sage, to be able to communicate not only his existence and his intentions, but also moral truth. And these seem to be things that we're like you just said, like, hey, we're finite beings. How are we, how are we supposed to know this? Well, we're finite beings, but we also know things like there's an external world and there's other minds and there's a past. And these are all, famous philosophical things that we don't actually have any valid justifications for. These are just things we take for granted. They're immediately obvious to us, though, that you have real experiences in a mind, and there is this external world that's not merely a projection of my own mind, and the past wasn't created 8 minutes ago. There really was a past. My memories are, these are things that are immediately obvious. God could be like that for us. God could give us an inner awareness such that he is like a light that's always on. And no matter how much his brightness fluctuates. It always remains on unless we were to close our eyes and somehow
Right.
resist it. But it's clear that there are people who aren't resisting God. And so these non-resistant non-theists, as they're called, those are imperfections of the world. God created a world in which there were people that he supposedly wants a loving relationship with him that just can't have a relationship with because they don't believe he exists. And you can't have a meaningful relationship with someone unless you believe they exist.
Yeah.
That's just like a necessary condition of a meaningful relationship.
Yeah.
Is to think that the other party, is really there.
I mean, yeah.
I mean, and that's something that I will encounter a lot, and I will try to talk with theists about, especially the more Calvinist they are, the more
Someone please pour me another drink. We're talking about Calvinists. I got it's too much.
But just
Calvinists and precepts, man. Whew.
Right? That like we'll be talking about, slavery in the Bible, or be talking about, like Numbers 31, which is, in my opinion, the most horrifying thing that God does in the Bible. But with it, like, we'll be talking about it and they'll be like, well, but God is beyond our understanding. We can't judge what he does because he's just so beyond us. And I'm like, okay, well, if we can't determine that God is bad, you also can't determine God is good. He's beyond our understanding, or he is or we can't understand him. It's one or the other. And excuse me.
I just think that Calvinists are people that got like picked last for sports in gym class. Like, I'm convinced that that's who those people are, because now they need to be able to lord it over everyone, that they were predestined to be the winners.
Yeah, so I think it's the ones that just really have the strongest faith, in the sense that they take the Bible the most literal. In the sense that they're like, look, the foundation is the Bible, and everything's built around that. And so they find it the least compromising view. But by being the least compromising view, it's the one that embraces some of the worst parts of Christian theology.
Yeah. I mean, I what I always say is that, like, Calvinism is if you had a degradation kink and made it your whole personality.
I'm the worst ever. Yeah, I am the chief among sinners. Someone please get me a whip so I can beat myself daily. Self-flagellation. Anyway, I will move away from making fun of Calvinists because I could truly do it forever.
Yeah, let's move to the young earth creationists. Those are the ones that really. I'm a nuclear engineer, so they really get under my skin, because I'm like,
why you're so
I'm like, I know the half-life of uranium. The Earth is not 6,000 years old, like, and we know that.
No, dude, I grew up a young earth creationist, like full on 6,000 years. That's it. And there was this guy in my church.
I never thought Earth was only 6,000 years old, but yeah,
that's lucky you, because I was like, that was drilled into my dome.
Yeah.
And I remember there was this one guy that went to my church, and I actually don't remember what, if any, qualifications he had. Who knows, honestly. But like, he was super into like fossils, and so he was like, he had all these fossils that he was like showing me. Honestly, right now this feels really creepy, but as a young child, and he would also like talk about, half-lives and dating, and how like everybody gets carbon dating wrong, and like I still barely know what carbon dating is, to be honest. So when like things like this come up, I'm like, let me refer y'all to actual scientists, because it's not me. Yeah, sorry, someone in the chat. Yes, only 6,000 years old. Like, full on, no hidden meaning there, no jokey jokes. Like, that's what I was taught. And in fact, the school that I went to for several years was a private Christian school. Some of y'all know this. And effectively, we did something called accelerated Christian education, which were just like packets of workbooks that we did in our own little cubicles. And the evidence that they gave for evolution being false, I need y'all to prepare. Hold on to your butts. was that the Loch Ness monster existed. That's it.
Ooh.
That's all. And there's like actual.
I've heard you say that like I've heard you say that like 4 times, and each time I'm still just like, what?
Yeah, like genuinely for a while I thought it was a fever dream until I ran across an article from like the New York Times that was talking about it and how ridiculous it was, and I was like, okay, I'm not crazy. Like that really was what I was taught.
What was taught?
Like
I have a question for you, Ben.
please.
So I have a friend who has a YouTube channel on here, and he's also on TikTok. His name is Shane the Skeptic, and he loves philosophy. And one of the things that he'll talk about is the fact that not enough atheists study philosophy. They'll study theology. They will try to, try to gear themselves up for like, I want to be able to debate theists, but they don't study philosophy. And so like one of the things that I will see is atheists that will get so frustrated and so angry talking to theists because they're like, why, like what are we not getting when we're talking to each other? And so I was just wondering, versus like talking to atheists that have studied philosophy versus the ones that haven't, what are some of the trends that you notice with them talking with theists versus and like how those conversations go?
Yeah. So, yeah. So with the more philosophically trained atheists, they will approach conversations in what's known as the dialectic method. That's kind of the philosophical method of dialogue. In the sense that you ask, hey, well, what do you mean by this? Okay, well, let's look at this claim. Let's unpack this. Let's see if these concepts fit together and try to resolve disagreements as much as you can. Whereas the less philosophically trained atheists, it's more like a court of law in the sense of it's like, okay, well, you're giving the theist is giving a defense and the atheist is a prosecutor. And so the skeptic is saying, look, make your case, defend theism, give evidence, give proof, and then just kind of dismiss it. And so that's kind of a lazy way of interacting, at least from a philosophical point of view, because really all you're doing there is playing the role of the religious skeptic. You aren't actually taking a positive position yourself or, making claims that a theist could interact with. So I'm also what's called a metaphysical naturalist. So that's the positive part of my philosophy, which entails atheism. And I'm also a humanist. That makes up my ethical view of the world. And so these are things that I say, look, when I engage with theists, I want to make those kinds of arguments that I mentioned earlier, where we compare our worldviews, where I'm like, look, naturalism is simpler. It explains things better. I don't need theism. Naturalism is simpler. These are just chips that keep falling in the naturalist camp. And being able to do that, I feel like not only allows you to have better conversations with theists, but helps you grow more yourself. Like you're able to refine your own views. You're able to understand other people's views better and see where they're coming from. And you can oftentimes resolve deep disagreements with people that you have other deeper disagreements with. And you can, these are my friends as well. Like a lot of my theist friends are philosophers whose views I greatly disagree with in certain ways, but who I have great respect for. Whereas I feel with that court of law thing, you make more enemies than you do friends. It can kind of become one of those war of words and jabs. And I've certainly participated in it too, especially in situations where I feel like I'm being disrespected or gaslit by a theist. Like, okay, F off. Like I'm done with you. You're not worth my time. I have a job. I have a family. Like I'm not wasting my time on you anymore. And there's really no nice way to say that to some people other than to just ignore them.
Yeah. I think ignoring them is actually the nice way. If I'm being honest.
That's what I've been trying to default to, is to just,
Your girl
water
takes
up
the
and goes
low
back.
road.
Yeah.
So, like, anyway, there's lots
I
of
try to take the high road, but I definitely don't succeed all the time. So
no,
it's
I
one of my
think
shortcomings.
no, I from what I have seen, you largely take the high road, and if you're not taking the high road, you're certainly not taking the low road. Which I greatly respect, and I think it's very important.
I used to have
Don't
a
try
very
that bullshit
strict
with me, y'all.
Yeah, I used to have a very strict policy of not blocking people because I didn't want to be someone who censored. And traditional
no.
Catholics changed that for me. I was like, nope, don't.
Yeah, gotta go.
Like, and my mental health is so much the better for just blocking traditional Catholics.
Yeah.
Some of them are just some of the most horrible people
Mental
that I've ever
health.
met.
Yeah, boundaries are so important for mental health, y'all.
Yeah. I do
And
also
that's
think
not to say that all traditional Catholics are like that. I have several traditional Catholics who are friends of mine, but they're
few and far between.
yeah.
I do definitely think, like, so again, I know everyone is probably thinks that I'm just like an anti-theist. And that's not actually true. Like, some of my closest friends are Christians. The reality is, I think you can tell pretty quickly when someone is willing to be intellectually honest, or at least engage in a way where they can say, this is my position, this is how I'm defending it. You might have an a opposing viewpoint, this is how you're defending it, and like maybe we never come to a middle ground, but like ultimately you're not being hateful to each other and neither side is in it to win. I think sometimes that's the problem, right? If you're in it to win, then you're not listening. Nobody's listening, nobody's learning. And I do oftentimes, and I don't think this is like specific to being an atheist or being a theist, most people, when they get into these sort of interactions, they're just there to win. Like they want
It's an ego
score
thing.
points to win or like dunk, right? And listen, I get it. I get wanting to dunk. I really do.
People are motivated by status, and so like
right.
in your camp, you know, if you're an apologist,
that's
how you get status.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think like again, I think just in the ways that like you interact versus like I interact, and like we don't have to spend a lot of time on this, but like the people that I interact with online, because I'm sure there's people in the chat that are like, what are you talking about? That's what you do all day long, is dunk on people. And yes, you're right. I do that. But that's because these people,
some people deserve to be dunked on.
Yeah, they show time and again that they have no interest in learning anything, in evolving. Okay. So all they want to do is prove their point in some way. And like if that's how you show up online, then like let's go.
Okay, so Marjorie Taylor Greene today had like there's this video that was released where she was saying that being against Christian nationalism means that you're a domestic terrorist. And that's really terrifying because she just won her primary in Georgia. Like there are people that vote for her. And like everybody who
she's openly embracing the label of Christian nationalist.
Right? Oh, right. Yeah. Like totally. I mean, she's spoken at white supremacist
but socialism is a dirty word. Boo.
Right. And but it's that
yeah, but also I need the government to pay for my highways. Thank you.
There's nothing that we could say to get through to Marjorie Taylor Greene. It doesn't matter what.
No, she's so far beyond the plane of reason
that we know that you know, but there's a lot of apologists and a lot of pastors and a lot of people and I won't even just say apologists and pastors, because I have also met atheists that are toxic as fuck that that
our community has
here's
very
the thing is that like yes, you can leave dogma, or sorry, you can't leave dogma. You can leave a dogmatic religion and still be dogmatic. All you've left behind is the religion, right? You can leave a religion and still be a fucking bigot.
You can have a PhD and still be an idiot.
Oh my God. David Falk. Yeah, there's a couple of people I can think of right off the top. Yeah, I mean, there like all of these things can be true, right? Like it's, and I think especially in Christianity, like I feel like I use this term a lot, but because Christianity in America is so deeply intertwined with white supremacy, deeply, you can leave Christianity and still be a racist fuck. You know what I mean? Like, that's the reality of the situation. Like, you can leave the religion and still hold on to so many of the toxic elements. You just don't believe in God anymore. And, like, that's great. But also, have we addressed the misogyny? Have we addressed the homophobia? Have we addressed the racism? Have we addressed any of these things? Or have we just said, like, well, I don't believe in God anymore, therefore I am superior to all of you? I want to pause there for just 1 second. I don't know if Ben has a hard stop time. I tried to ask in the chitty chat, but
baby is asleep, so
okay.
I'm good.
So what I would like to do at this moment is take just a brief break, because I do actually need to refill my glass of things, and I saw that Ben's beer was gone.
Excellent.
And then so like a 1 minute, 2 minute break, and then hop back in, and maybe we can go over a few more things in your argument and do a question and answer from the audience. How does that sound?
Sounds great.
All right, I'll see y'all in 60 seconds, probably.
Yeah, be right back. My pet's collars are driving me fucking nuts.
Hi, losers. What are you doing still? No. What's up, Bill?
Yeah,
Hi.
ASMR intermission. Yeah.
Oh yeah, sorry, it's just me talking to my dogs. Apologies. Here, do you want to say hi, Stella? Come here. Oh no, you don't. Come here, Stella. Come here, Stella. Come here, guys. Come here. Say hi to the people. Okay, Stella, come here. Ooh. This
Hi,
Stella.
Oh,
Puppy.
look at your sweet eyes. Look at your
One
face.
of like 500. Okay, thank you. Get out of here. Come here, Time. Come here. Come on. Okay, everybody out. Let's go. Losers.
The Persian princess.
Apologies, apologies.
I have 5 cats. They're running around somewhere around here. I've just accepted my role as the crazy cat guy.
Oh yeah,
Okay,
hey,
so
embrace it.
Five cats and 3 dogs in my house.
Yeah, you get a zoo.
4 dogs.
You're like me. You have a zoo.
Hi, Neil.
What up, Neil? I had a pet goat growing up, and we slept in the same bed.
Nice.
So that should just like let y'all know where my parents were at. To be honest, loved that goat to death, but there's a lot going on there. All right, thank you all for being so patient. Let's see here. I'm hopping back to the notes. I think I said this already. Hello, Neil. Great to have you. Imagine joining the feed right now. I know, right? Let's see here. Okay. I am interested. So I was reading this portion of the notes or the document. Sorry, the brief. And like, I think these are words that I read over a lot of the time, and I don't actually think about what they mean when applied to topics like this. So we have like epistemic versus practical axiological versus deontological. I don't read that word very much, to be honest. Um, but like, so when you talk about these things, like, what does this mean in relation to your argument from imperfection?
Yeah. So this is a great question. This is where I wanted to take it, because this is kind of where I'm trying to help move the argument from imperfection forward in philosophical circles. And so to just kind of recap, the argument from imperfection is really two premises. The first being a conceptual premise, and the second being an empirical one. And so the conceptual premise is that a perfect God could not create an imperfect world. And the empirical premise is that the actual world is an imperfect world. Therefore, it follows that a perfect God did not create the actual world. Well, so we can formulate that. That's just the basic bare bones of the argument. That's fundamentally what you're trying to drive at. And so we can draw distinctions to help us formulate these arguments better. And so that's what those distinctions in the brief are. And so there's 5 broad distinctions, but they're not all interesting. Some of them are more popular than others, but they're not all interesting. And so I'll explain what I mean by that. So the first one was epistemic versus practical. So epistemic being coming from the word epistemology and having to deal with knowledge. So like, how is it that we know things? Whereas practical are, things like actions and willing and the way that the world is as far as practical considerations. And so the epistemic consideration is the hiddenness argument, and the practical consideration is the problem of evil. And so we can formulate it
like divine hiddenness.
Divine hiddenness. God's not as obvious as he could be. That's the problem of hiddenness.
The worst ever argument.
Yeah. That God is hidden is an epistemic consideration. It's something. It's an imperfection of the world, but it's not a moral concern. Whereas the problem of evil is a moral concern. Like we're concerned about, why does God allow all these different evils and other imperfections in the world? And so the second distinction is between general and particular. So there's general facts about evil, like the kinds, the amounts, and the distributions of evil in the world. So we might say that those general facts count against God, their imperfections. Or we can be more particular with it. We can actually come up with actual cases where we say, look, children who suffer with bone cancer, people who suffer from Alzheimer's disease, fawns that burn in forest fires. These are particular instances of imperfections where it seems we have no idea why a loving God would prevent, with the power and motivation to prevent these sort of things. Why are these sort of things the case? And so they can make very, very strong arguments.
I mean, the Holocaust?
Exactly.
I know that's the big go-to, and I know there's been many other, Rwanda, there's so many other things and places this has happened, like child soldiers, Yemen.
So that's
anybody?
An example of a particular consideration. So remember, our second premise was the world is imperfect. Well, why is the world imperfect? The Holocaust. The world would just be more perfect if the Holocaust never occurred.
Yeah.
So the third distinction is objective and subjective. This is where I think we're to the point. This is one of the ones that's just not that interesting, because it depends on if you're an objectivist or a subjectivist about normative properties. Normative properties being properties like good and bad or right and wrong. These are the kinds of facts that count in favor of us believing that the world is some way. I don't think that's because if there's objective facts about the world, then the problem's there. It's objectively imperfect. Okay. Mm-hmm. Well, if we say that it's subjectively imperfect, okay, well, that's still an imperfection from God's point of view. That's the problem still there. So moving from subjective to objective theories, I don't think helps progress the argument any further. And I don't think it gives theists any plausible outs.
God's ways are higher than ours, Ben.
Yeah. His subjective ways, I guess, are just higher than
garbage
our subjective ways. Yeah.
His genocide.
the fourth distinction
Tyrannical
is
ways.
axiological and deontological. And
Yes, I'm interested in this.
these are very intimidating terms. And so they come from ethics. So there's two broad theories in ethics, where the good is in the right, and then the other one is where the right is in the good. So if the good is in the right, that's the deontological view. And if the right is in the good, that's the axiological view. So the axiological view says, look, goodness is what's foundational. We understand rightness in terms of goodness. And the deontologist says, no. We understand goodness in terms of rightness. Rightness is prior. So this is a very big divide in ethics. So if you're going to put forward an argument from imperfection, are you putting it in terms of value, like good and bad? Or you put it in terms of deontological properties, like right and wrong? And it can matter. Some people think that, look, there's certain principles of morality where it's always wrong to torture children for the fun of it. Or it's always wrong to torture children if it can be prevented. And so that's a very powerful way of formulating the argument from imperfection. Other people disagree. And they think,
God is just like my dad. Sorry. Anyway, moving on from that bad joke.
So
I didn't go see
a lot of
he never came back.
A lot of apologists think that they can avoid the argument from imperfection by just, if it's being presented in deontological terms, to just move to an axiological framework, and that can solve it. Or vice versa, if it's framed in axiological terms, they'll just move to a deontological framework and avoid the problem. I don't think they can do it. I think both formulations pose big problems. The last distinction is logical versus evidential. This is by far the most popular distinction, and I also think it's the least important. And in a way, the least interesting.
Ain't that usually how it goes?
Yeah. So the idea is that when we consider the nature of an imperfection, we can say that that imperfection entails that God doesn't exist, or we can say that the consideration is evidence against God. Either way, the conclusion is that God doesn't exist. So a lot of apologists want to parse it out this way to say, look, the logical formulation of the argument is what's called a rebutting defeater. And the evidential is an undercutting defeater. So a rebutting defeater says it refutes theism. It just says, look, there's this other view that's true that says theism can't be true. It's the hardest defeater you can have. An undercutting defeater says, hey, look, here's a reason to doubt this claim. It doesn't conclusively prove that claim is false, but it makes us skeptical of it. They want to claim that this logical version is dead, and that theism isn't just outright refuted, and that they can deal with this evidential problem where it's not quite certain or not whether they think that problem can be solved. I dissent from that view. I think both present a problem, and I think that drawing the distinction between logical and evidential is obvious as more often than not a red herring. It's a way to distract from the actual problem.
It feels very ancillary. Yeah, it feels like I don't want to talk about this, so let's bicker about semantics over here.
So one of the marks of a good argument is to have premises that all parties to the discussion can reasonably be expected to concede. That's what makes a really good, not just that it's sound, but that it has really, really plausible premises. Well, I think a lot of those moves in the logical problem of evil, the logical argument from imperfection, the moves that we're expected to grant to the theist are not plausible ones. One of them being libertarian free will, the idea that we can have this contra-causal conception of free will. Another one is that all created essences, all created finite persons suffer from what's called trans-world depravity. Yeah, these are the fancy names that philosophers like to name their ideas. And basically it is the thesis that it's possible It's possible that God couldn't create any world without people who actually choose wrong. Like that's just a possibility. I just don't grant that possibility. That's just
that made my eyes hurt.
Yeah. So it's basically this logically contingent rule that God, an omnipotent God just has to put up with. He just can't create a world without imperfections.
Well, sure. Then how would he also be all powerful? Are we just deciding that he's not that thing? Like he knows everything.
I think that's the contradiction. Yeah, I think that's the contradiction, to say that God just can't create perfect creatures because all created essences suffer from transworld depravity is just to deny that God is all powerful.
That's a terrible
That's
argument.
the problem.
Just from
I agree.
Someone who doesn't know anything about this, that's basura. Sorry, I'm like taken aback by how terrible that argument is. Okay, God created everything, but in fact, in creating everything, there's no way for him to have created something where, depravity didn't exist.
Yeah, where everyone freely chooses. So the idea is like, look, God can create free creatures that always choose right. There's no contradiction in choosing right once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, infinitely. Right. There's no contradiction in that. That's a logically coherent idea. And God is only restricted in his power by logical possibility. So the question now becomes, why can't God create a world where everyone chooses right? And the famous, what's called the free will defense, says, look, God just couldn't, it's not a world God could create. One, because God had
defense.
Yeah. It's well, they're forced into this position. They because the world is obviously one where everyone doesn't always choose right. So why is it the world that way? It has to be because God can't.
But it's also again, I know I keep going back to this and it might be a little bit pedantic, but like, how are we defining right? Right? This is the same argument that's like God is the moral standard. God is blah, 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 blah. And it's like, all right, if you say so, but like there are points and times in society in which killing another human being was deemed morally correct, right? So now we're saying at a later point in time, no, actually it's objectively wrong, no matter what the like place and time is. But then at that point, they would have said, no, it's actually morally correct, regardless of place, time, whatever. So this, and maybe I'm a little off base here, but this like notion of creating, people that choose right all the time. Okay, when? According to what standard? How do we know what right is? Like, how are we defining right?
Well, so that's a good question, but it might take us into metaethics. It might take us out of the philosophy of religion and into metaethics. But it is a legitimate question. But so in this point in the dialectic, we would have conceded a mutual concept of right, because we're going to say that God exists and that God is morally perfect. So God, all of God's actions are right. So there has to be we have to cash that claim out. So when a lot of apologists make something like a moral argument, I don't think they realize the implications of what they're doing by doing that. Because if you're going to say that God is the standard of goodness or rightness, to say that God is morally perfect is an entirely meaningless claim at that point.
Yeah,
you've taken away all of the content. Yeah,
God can dash some babies' heads against the rocks. See y'all next time.
Yeah, God's character could literally be analogous to a cosmic Hitler, and that theory implies that that's what would become right, or like that would be moral perfection. And so this is why
morality is giving me money, and so if you give me money, you are
me
good.
Too. Hit my cash out.
Yeah.
No. You don't give me money. There's something wrong with you on like a spiritual level, and you need to give me more money to fix it.
So I think the sense of right that all parties can concede, the concept of right, is this idea that when people behave rightly, they behave in a way that no one could reasonably reject. Where that concept of reasonably is a realist concept. Now that's controversial. That's a controversial concept. However, it's one that we can all concede for the sake of discussion. Because but again, that standard will apply to God. Like God is constrained by principles that no one could reasonably reject. And so if one of God's principles is just let children suffer with bone cancer, that's going to be disallowed by a principle that no one could reasonably reject.
Yeah, but God. So
yeah, well, then that's special pleading. So this is another area where philosophy can become useful in that you can spot certain fallacies like that. Well, it's like, okay, well, if you're going to like, why is God exempt from a moral law or a moral principle? Moral principles are supposed to use the jargon categorical. They apply to all subjects in similar situations. So let's imagine Peter Singer's famous example of a small child drowning in a shallow pond. And you stumble across him and you can save this child. Do you save the child, or do you say, no, I don't want to muddy my boots. I'm not going to save the child. Just let him drown. Obviously, you save the child. 99% of people say you save the child. Like, concerns about your shoes aren't morally relevant. You have an obligation to save that child. All right. The child's drowning. What about God? God's in every bit of a position, if not a better position, to save the drowning child than I am.
Where are you at, though?
Like, I could lose my shoes. My shoes could be ruined from doing this. God cannot lose anything in this situation. So using the exact same moral principle of, we should save children that are drowning if we can at little to no cost to ourselves, that principle would apply to God and enter the argument from imperfection. Yeah. That children die, even though there's an omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent God who has the power and the motivation to do what is right, children still drown.
That sounds like a bitch, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, he sounds indistinguishable from the non-existent, an indifferent universe. This is the naturalist's point is, look, this is what we'd expect on naturalism. The universe is indifferent. Children just drown because there is no mind that cares about the well-being of children who are swimming.
I have to say that I absolutely love this juxtaposition where I'm like, I don't know, God sounds like a bitch. And you're like, here's all the reasons that he is a bitch without saying it.
Yeah, here, let me justify that claim.
I love it. Yeah. Brings me joy. I guess my next, I hope this is sort of a relevant question. And it's one that I saw come up a lot on the back and forth on Twitter today, that I think is useful or would be useful for folks to sort of learn about. How is it possible that a perfect being could ever create something imperfect or with the potential to be imperfect?
So this is a really great question.
Thank you so much.
Yes. So, because the question is, this is the driving intuition of the argument. A perfect creator can't create anything less than a perfect world. Natural question is why? Why can't it create it? And so, actually, I have a quote. I actually went and looked in my my lectures on philosophical theology by Kant.
Wait. Who are you lecturing?
I'm sorry?
You said your lectures. I'm curious where you're lecturing. Who are you lecturing?
Oh, no. So it's called Lectures on Philosophical Theology.
I thought they were your lectures, and I was like, tell me more.
So Immanuel Kant, he's like, the big figure in philosophy. And so he says in there that the world created by God is the best of all possible worlds, is clear for the following reason. If a better world than the one willed by God were possible, then a will better than the divine will would also have to be possible. For indisputably, what will is better, which chooses what is better. But if a better will is possible, then so is a being who could express this better will. And therefore, this being would be more perfect and better than God. This is a contradiction, for God is the greatest possible being. So what is Kant saying here? What is the deep insight that Kant, who's drawing off of Leibniz, gives us here?
All I'm saying is that, like, if I had the power, I could create many, many, many better worlds than the one we have at the moment.
But the point here is that God must build must create a world to which cannot be greater. God is unsurpassably good. So the goodness of God must bear out in his creation, because if he could have created something better, then there's a will that could have created that better, that better thing, but then that would have been a will that's greater than his will, but God's will is unsurpassable. So God's creation must have maximum value in it, or else God himself is not unsurpassable. And because so Kant says, for indisputably that will is better, which chooses what is better. So the best will is the one that couldn't choose something better. That's why a perfect being implies nothing less than a perfect creation. Because let's just think about it. Like, let's imagine a perfect artist that could only create one thing, one piece of art. To keep the analogy, God creates one world. An artist that creates one thing, would that perfect artist create something imperfect or something perfect? We would expect it to create something perfect. And in fact, if we observed imperfections, we wouldn't infer the perfection from those imperfections. What would we infer from imperfection? More imperfection. Now we're back at the argument from imperfection.
Yeah, I mean, and again, I feel like this is an incredibly elementary thing to say, but it feels very much like if I'm trying to do a math problem and I don't get it right, I don't understand the problem. Like, I don't understand the math there, right? If I did understand the math there, then I would have done it correctly. And again, I know that's a very base analogy, but it's just like weird to me that when we think on this like cosmological level, or when folks think on the cosmological level, that we make shit up. Shit that doesn't make any sense. Like, well, there's a perfect being, and somehow, knowing everything, he created an entire species that is literally pretty much only going to exist to cause harm, like on a large level. It just, and I know what I'm expressing is a very sort of basic, fundamental sort of question or misunderstanding, and what you're talking about is much more high level. But it will just never stop being bizarre to me that people can say that God is perfect, that he knows everything, that he knows everything that's ever going to happen. But he was okay with it. Totally fine, because he was fucking bored and wanted some company. Like, that's effectively the conservative Christian argument, right? That like God really just wanted to be in relationship. And I think that leads to another question. Can a perfect being have unmet needs? Can it have, or they have wants that are unfulfilled?
I don't think so, because I think omnipotence is going to say, and so the theist might have a way out of this particular problem, and by just because there's another property that they ascribe to God is perfect freedom. So that God's choice to create was perfect. He's not creating out of necessity. It's not the case that God had to create. God was free to choose nothing. He could have created nothing. Still would have been a perfect world. It just would have been, God's perfection and nothing else. And so he created it only for itself, in the idea that relationship with finite persons is a good thing. So he created us to have a relationship. And I think that's fairly plausible in the sense that we can grant that much, but just as soon as we grant that, that problem of hiddenness that I talked about comes roaring in.
Yep.
Like,
and also, how in the world does that outweigh all of the millennia of suffering? Because God got to have some
that's the practical part
with a few people, right? Like, effectively.
Well, yeah.
Sorry.
So when I was losing my faith, there were two really broad considerations that were kind of the thread that was being pulled on. And so the first had to do with hiddenness, but it was in the form of religious disagreement. Just I looked around and there's religious confusion everywhere, and no one really seems to know the right way to resolve that religious disagreement. That was big. But the second one was biological evolution. Come back to the argument from imperfection. It's just like, why would a perfect God choose? I mean, we're talking millions and millions of years of sentient suffering and languishing. for us. Like all of this had, the foresight was us. And we were meant to eat our other, our closest relatives, the Neanderthals. Like that was just part of the plan. And to me, I was like, no, like I understand why creationists are motivated to push back. Special creation makes way more sense than biological evolution. Like
Will
if you're talking from
special creation for folks.
Yes. So special creation is the idea that certain organisms are created more or less in their present state. So that God intended for squirrels and Homo sapiens to have the features that they do, rather than them being the gradually modified features of descendants over time through evolution by natural selection.
Yeah, why did he design eyebrows? You know what I mean? Just because mine are so great.
Yeah.
No. No.
He gave us noses so that we could wear spectacles.
Why do men have nipples?
Real talk.
I don't have an answer for that.
I don't want to interrupt you totally. I feel like it's important because I'm watching the chat. If y'all have questions for Ben, please tag me with your question. I need to be tagged in it, otherwise it might be missed. And we're starring them. We're going to save them for the question and answer. Sorry, I know it's kind of an awkward interruption.
If you're on your cell phone and you can't like type out Heathen Queen, just put @HQ and I will make a note of it.
Yeah. It's just because I'm seeing some questions that don't have any tags, and it's not like I don't think anyone's seeing them, but I just don't want them to be missed because I think y'all have a lot of really good questions. And so I want to make sure when we do the question and answer in a few minutes that they get asked. So that's all. Sorry for the interruption. Please continue.
The example that I go to a lot that I find just absolutely bewildering from a theistic point of view is Alzheimer's disease. So I've not personally in my life experienced someone who suffered with Alzheimer's disease, but I've obviously read about it. I've seen documentaries about it, and I know people who have loved ones who have suffered with it. And to me, I'm absolutely terrified of that ever happening to me, for one. And second, this is part of a providential plan. Like God created a person to have a relationship with them, and then in their later years just destroys the person that there was. Yeah. And so I don't know, like when they die and they, go to the afterlife, are they in their previous form, or, is the dementia still there? It's such a heart-wrenching condition to see someone suffer with.
And also it's entirely incredibly ableist in a lot of ways, because it assumes that the way that a perfect body is very much one way, right? And I understand nobody wants dementia or Alzheimer's, right? Because that is a neurological issue that affects your brain, and I get that. But I think it does lean into this very Christian idea that there is and maybe it's more than just Christian, but it is specifically very Christian because of the bodily resurrection at the end of time, that a perfect body is someone who has full use of both arms and both legs, can see, can hear, can taste, can feel, can move normally. All of these things that if you think about it, you've probably, and I don't mean like you specifically, Ben, I mean like you, everybody, have been taught from a very young age is like what a normal, perfect human body is.
For sure.
Right?
It's conditioned.
And so, exactly. And so this is not like a jab at anyone. It's just this thought process.
No, these are biases.
And that we lean into this, that like, well, the perfect body is this way. And so therefore anything other than that is something that needs to be like fixed. Something that's wrong, something that's a product of original sin. And I know I understand it's a bit different with dementia and Alzheimer's. But it's still very interesting to me to think that Christians hold this standard of the perfect body and mind is X, because it also very much happens with mental illness and neurodivergence. And then to have them say that like like this argument that you're making, that also dementia and Alzheimer's are like totally okay. You know what I mean? Like it's just like it's just weird. It doesn't make any sense.
And the traditional, what makes dementia really stand out is that the traditional theodicies are entirely powerless to provide any sort of insight to them. So the free will to fit, like Alzheimer is not a result of free actions of any finite person. It's something it's part of our evolutionary history. And something like the soul building theodicy, I mean, these are soul destroying conditions. These are people,
Right.
these
like in what world does dementia build your soul?
Exactly. Like I don't know. I know of no cases, exactly 0 cases of Alzheimer's, building someone's soul and help it,
I will say this. I used to volunteer in nursing homes, for lack of a better term. Dementia and Alzheimer's didn't do anything but destroy. That's it. Destroy and wreck and ruin and cause unimaginable pain and harm to both the people that it was happening to and to everybody around them. And yeah.
I can make sense of that in a naturalistic, indifferent universe, in a universe where there isn't this mind that cares about our well-being. If we just do away with that, if we take Laplace's quip and say we have no need for that assumption, all that mystery disappears. At that point, it's a matter of probability and the laws of nature and our physiology. Like that's everything is explained. There's no mystery. It's when we insert the radically dualistic metaphysics of perfect being theism into the clockwork of the world that we go, wait a minute.
So granted, this was at an undergraduate level, but as I mentioned, I think earlier, I studied economics. I did a ton of statistics. And I actually did work for people in statistics, like building models and testing things and running things and collecting data and doing all of this. All of that to say that, like, if someone said, because trust me, I took a number of probability courses, it's all random. And if something like this happens, it actually doesn't have any inherent meaning. It's just like a weird fluctuation of nature. That makes a lot of sense because, like, that is actually what the data suggests, right?
Yeah.
And sure, there are like some, you can say like, well, these group of people, they did X, and so it seems like there's a more likely chance of them having Y. But like, largely, it's luck of the draw. Like, there's no way when you're 5 years old for someone to say this person is going to have Alzheimer's, or this person is going to have cancer, or this person is going to have whatever, right? And so that idea it makes perfect sense. Like, and I think, like, I guess all I'm saying is, like, it's not comforting. There's no reassurance in that model, right? But it actually makes sense. When we start to say, like, but perfect being, that's when you might, like, be able to maneuver your way and find some comfort or some reassurance, but actually it doesn't make any sense. And it's especially true if you've ever spent more than 5 minutes processing data or like learning how models work. And
that's the Panglossian optimism that you have to see Alzheimer's and bone cancer in children and say, look, it's all for the best. Like this is part of the providential plan, and if the world didn't have this in it, the world would be worse than what it is. And to me, it's just like Voltaire says in his Candid satire. It's really hard to believe. Like that's the fundamental irrationality that we see with
like
theism.
You're telling me
what is comfortable rather than what's true.
Right. Like, you're telling me that if people didn't starve to death, the world would be worse off?
The Holocaust, right. Like, best possible worlds feature holocausts.
Yeah, best possible world means that 6 million Jewish people were tortured and killed. Like, that would take a lot of convincing. and I genuinely don't think it's possible. Like I can't imagine
Well,
someone
We
being able to
ate the
convince me of that.
Neanderthals. We warred with the Neanderthals until we ate them all. Like
Yeah.
I have to sometimes say that, like, when I in conversation like with theists, be like, say that out loud. Like that was the provident. Like, not only is that the providential plan, but God sustained that in being at every moment.
Yeah, Nadimos, yes, exactly, for God reasons. Unbeknownst to you, though,
Beyond
so
our
just
kin.
fucking sack up, bitch. That's yeah. Anyway,
yeah.
yeah,
That's well, just even on a smaller scale of like just even this past week with what happened in Uvalde, like with people talking about like, well, this is a sin problem, and it's like, okay, so because we have free will, because we have sin, like God valued the free will of an 18-year-old more than the 22 lives that were lost.
Well, that's why the cops didn't go into the school, was because they were respecting the free will of
yeah.
the
I just want to
shooter.
be clear to anybody that's on this stream: fuck the police. Like 100%, all cops are bastards.
I got a lot of pushback on a
No.
meme I shared earlier in the week because it was relating to this problem of evil. People got very upset when cops stood by and let an evil action occur like it did. And
Yeah.
why are when you turn around and you apply that exact same moral standard to God, God just stands around and lets evil things happen like that. If you're going, like, it's the double standard could not be more obvious.
Yeah, no.
Of a morals double standard. We have a moral standard, and God has some other moral standard, and I just don't think morality is like that.
No. And this is an unabashed plug, but I did interview Alex Vitale, who wrote The End of Policing, and that will be out shortly. It's up on my Patreon, but whatever. And he talks in depth. He's a sociologist who has been studying policing for the last 30 years. He is a professor, I believe, at the University of New York.
Oh, wow. That's a big deal.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
He was formative. So like I wrote my thesis in college on the statistical correlation of early education, or the quality of early education, and committing crime later in life, and then likelihood of being incarcerated. And there's a lot of very clear connections there, but I digress from that. Why I said that was because when I was writing this, I read his book, The End of Policing, and books like The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander and Our Prisons Obsolete by Angela Y. Davis, and all of these books. And I know this is slightly off topic, but he talks about how police make us less safe because we assign all of our societal problems to this militarized group that actually doesn't have the training in any way to handle these things. And so if we're going to talk about the Uvalde shooting, which we are, I think it's incredibly important to consider why we lean so heavily on police, and also what they've actually done for any of us. And that's all I'll say on that topic. And then I'll let us scoot it back in. But yeah.
Yeah. So it's the point that I think a lot of people miss in the argument from imperfection too is that it's not the definition of perfection that's driving the argument here. It's the relationship between whatever kind of definition of perfection we're attributing to God, but then also the imperfection of creation. I think that's a super big point to make. It's the tension between those two things. So you can put whatever definition of perfection you want on the table, assuming that it's a plausible one and not some nonsense definition, but a plausible definition, and you're going to get the same tension. And if you get that tension, to use our police example, like if we were going to say that like the Uvalde Police Department was a stellar police department, the events that happened during that shooting would be evidence against the thesis, the claim that the Uvalde Police Department was a stellar police department. That's just, it would count against it. There would be attempt to say that they're a stellar police department, and given their actions during that shooting, there's a tension there. That's the
and
exact
also it would
same
depend
tension.
on how we. Sorry to interrupt, but it would depend on how we define, and I know this moves on, what a stellar police department is, right?
Yeah, well, that's a big philosophical question that I don't know if I'd be able to
we won't get into that,
answer.
but I'm just saying, this is what I'll say, because again, fuck the police. If you think that the police are obligated to protect you, boy, do you have another thing coming.
No, they're there to protect private property.
Exactly.
And, I mean, when they pay lip service to protect and serve, but they really don't have much legal obligation. Yeah,
but
they're
not
the role there is to punish it. Yeah, the state wants certain behaviors. That's what
they
it wants.
are protecting and serving a very specific hierarchy, and largely that hierarchy has to do with economics and racial power structures, and those two things are intertwined. And if you don't think so, fight me.
The police are there to incentivize us to behave in certain ways. Well, how do the police incentivize us to behave in certain ways? By punishing us.
Yep.
That's the incentive. If that weren't the case, they would be more like first responders of, like EMTs or fire departments. There
are no songs that say like fuck the
fire department.
Yeah, exactly. Like, they don't exist. And I quickly want to address just this comment that I envy your society if you think they don't need police. And I get that. I really do. And I want to say this. I live in East Oakland. So if you know, you know. This is not a calm place. This is not a peaceful place. It's actually one of the top areas of violence in the country. What I'm saying is not that we don't need any police as of flip the switch tomorrow, right? What I'm saying, and I know this is like off topic, but I just feel like it's important to kind of talk about, is that abolitionists of the police are not asking, how do we get rid of police tomorrow? They're asking, how do we fix the problems that exist that are causing all of these crimes, right?
The inequality regimes. How do we address the inequality regimes that's at the heart of
exactly
the system?
How do we resolve the exploitative nature of...
I wish I knew the answer to that question.
Origin. It started as an exploitive because it was literally, they were slave hunters. They were runaway slave hunters. That is the origin of the police. So everything since then is being built on systemic racism throughout the country.
Yeah. So I do think that when people say like, okay, well, and I'm credit to Alex Vitale for this, but like when people say, well, okay, well, then what happens if there's a serial killer? I think there is two things going on. One, there's a fundamental misunderstanding of what cops do 99% of their day. It has nothing to do with preventing crime. Two, I think that we are so far away from even having to worry about that, that it is a complete red herring at the moment, right? So just speaking as someone who lives in a very high crime area, largely what the police are responding to are a couple of things. Mental health crisis, which they're not equipped for in any way whatsoever, and they largely respond violently. And they largely respond violently to people that don't look like me. Just gonna say it. My mom, growing up, had tons of mental health crises. She's alive and kicking, no problem. And we can talk stats off here because trust me, I have them. Two, the issues that we actually need to address at the root of crime, right? So much of crime is based in economic need. And you might have to drill down into those crimes to see it, but people are not jumping into the black market because they think it sounds super safe and fun. They're doing it because they don't see many other options, right? There's not a lot of employment opportunity in their areas or to them. There's not a lot of resources available. Education really isn't something that's readily available. And I'm saying this as someone who is a relatively privileged white woman. I fought tooth and nail to get into college. And that's, again, that's coming from someone who has a lot of privilege. So I think when we say, well, do you just think society doesn't need cops? No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that I think there are many, many societal ills and issues that could be addressed by transferring funds from militarized policing to things such as universal basic income, available housing, employment resources, right?
Social services, mental health services. Imagine if someone was having a mental breakdown, or instead of calling the cops, we called, therapists and, social workers to help de-escalate the situation.
Yeah. So again, I'm not saying there's a situation or reality in which tomorrow we flip the switch and there's no cops. I don't think that exists. In fact, I think we are light years away from that, especially in places where I live. What I also think is that when we say things like this, we're totally deflecting from the possibility and power that we actually do hold. And again, I'm sorry, I know this is way off topic, but I just think it's really important considering the happenings of the last several weeks and just the last 25 years. But there is so much that we can do. And largely what we've come to believe as a society, or what we've come to decide, is that we don't want to deal with a lot of issues. And so we've isolated ourselves, especially if we are upper to middle class. We've decided that the better thing to do, not address the issues, is to get Ring cameras, to build fences, to live in gated communities, to do all of these things that we think make us safer. But in reality, they don't solve any of the problems that are at the root of crime. And what they actually do is isolate us. They isolate us from other people. They isolate us from reality. They isolate us from engaging in real solutions. And while we might feel safer, we're actually not creating a healthier society for any of us, right? If we created a healthier society in which there wasn't all this broken window policing, we would provide economic resources and other resources to people so that they don't feel the need en masse to rob or to sell drugs or to do whatever. And if we didn't criminalize addiction, if we treated it for what it is, as an illness, can you imagine the effect that would have on society?
I think that's the next big movement of reform in justice. No, you're fine. I wish I had read up a little bit more on this topic so I could say something a little bit more informed.
No, this is my area.
Yeah.
So I don't expect anyone to know as much or whatever. It's just something that I have spent the last decade
sure
on. But yeah.
I see the next big reform movement, and this might just be my inner Hegelian speculating, is that the justice system will move from this retributive institution to a more rehabilitative institution. And so that once we start realizing that punishing criminals doesn't make a whole lot of sense and doesn't solve a whole lot of problems, but rehabilitating criminals does make a difference and makes much more ethical sense. I think we'll start to see improvement, but again, you know, I wish I had empirical data and studies that I could cite here to help back up my claims. I don't have them in front of me, and so I feel like I'm kind of
this wasn't the conversation we signed up for, but like, so I get it. It's just when it comes up, I feel compelled to talk about it. And I will again try to keep this brief. I probably won't, knowing me. I volunteered for a while at San Quentin prison. Like, I have a pretty good understanding, a decent understanding of like what people are struggling with, what would help them, who these people are when they have resources. And this is not me saying that crime should go unpunished. Please hear me on that. But the idea behind our criminal justice system is that when you commit a crime, there is a consequence. You pay that consequence to society, and then you get to move on with your life, right? And that on its own is just transactional, right? Now, because we have criminalized things like mental illness, and we've criminalized things like addiction, we've set it up so that it's damn near impossible to ever actually pay your debt to society and move on. I worked in the reentry program, and so my job was basically, if you're going up for parole or you have a release date, I'm going to help you find housing, a job, if you're religious, sort of a local community, anything like that, like how to get a fucking cell phone to stay in touch with your parole officer. And the reality of the situation is that we've also criminalized homelessness. And because of that, when you're coming out of prison in an area that you actually don't even have any connections in, and you've perhaps committed a crime like, I don't know, arson, sexual assault, you can't find a halfway house. And then you also can't live with your family if they're living in any kind of subsidized housing, because they'll take the subsidized housing away from your poverty-stricken relative. So they put you.
I still can't believe that we imprison homeless people. To like, that's a choice. Like, that's a choice that our society made to imprison people who are homeless. And to me, I mean, I just saying it out loud to me, I'm just like,
my mom was homeless.
Our entire capitalist system depends on cheap labor to exploit. And so the prison industry complex is part of that, because that is essentially modern day slavery. They don't get paid for the work that they do.
Listen, if y'all thought slavery was outlawed, boy, do I have news for you. Go watch 13th on Netflix. It was not. Actually, you can pretty much still be a slave if you are incarcerated. God, we're so far off topic. I'm so sorry. So sorry.
Let's get back to
yeah. So sorry, Ben. This is like when we start talking about it, I'm like, I am going all in.
Yeah. So the argument from imperfection, I've spoken a lot about the argument from evil portion of it, but there's also the other side, the argument from hiddenness. And I really think this argument gets overlooked a lot in conversation. And I just want to mention just how powerful this line of thought is. And so the idea starts with the fact that God is perfectly loving. And so that's not a moral premise. So it supposes that God is perfectly loving. No, it's fair. It's fair. These are little fine points that matter in philosophy. And so we suppose that God is perfectly loving. And so how do we conceive of perfect love, a complete love, an absolute love, a love that's not deficient or lacking in any way? And so one suggestion is that a perfectly loving being is always open to relationship. So the analogy that's often given is that a parent is always open to relationship with their child if they're a perfectly loving parent. There's nothing that a perfectly loving parent would do to put relationship with their child out of reach of their child. Their child could have a relationship.
Would they hide in a cave?
No, they would not hide in a cave.
Okay. Well, here we are then.
Yeah. And so God would always be open to relationship with every finite person. Well, if God is always open to every finite person, then every finite person has a sufficient reason to believe that God exists, because God is always open to that relationship. Well, then we notice that not everyone has sufficient reason to believe that God exists. There are these non-resistant non-theists. The examples that are often given are former believers, lifelong seekers, isolated non-theists, and converts to non-theistic religions. These are all people that are not resisting a relationship with a God that's always open to relationship. And so that this observation that there are these kinds of people entails that there is no perfectly loving being. And if there is no perfectly loving being and God is essentially perfectly loving, it follows there is no God. And to me, that's just when I remember when I was, my faith was kind of waning, and I was on YouTube, watching debates and different things. And like, I was trying to figure out the problem of evil. The problem of evil is obviously like this thing that I was really struggling with.
You and everyone else.
Yeah. And so I saw this interview with J.L. Schellenberg, who's the author of the Hiddenness Argument. And he explained the Hiddenness Argument more or less about how I just laid it out. And I just remember getting so frustrated and be like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, I have this problem.
Yeah, I was 2 hours, but we're here.
I was like, I have this problem, this insurmountable problem of evil that I just can't. But now I've got this problem of hiddenness, and it wasn't very long after that before I was just like, I think I'm an atheist. Like, I just don't like this. Just doesn't work. You
or
want
at
me
least
to
agnostic, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Like I was like, I needed to make these pieces fit, and I was like, these don't fit. It's
You're trying to put together 2 separate puzzles.
Yeah, square peg, round hole. And
yeah,
it just
relatable.
Tink, 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 tink.
Let me in.
Heathen Queen, I don't think I told you this, but I remember one of the last times I went to church, my pastor was talking about how the author of Luke wrote it 4 years after Jesus had been crucified, resurrected, and ascended to heaven.
No,
and that's why, I know
that is not the case.
Right. No, but and that's why it's so reliable, is because the memories were so fresh. And it took everything in me not to literally laugh out loud, because I was like, does not think that we have fucking Google on our phones? Everyone and their mother knows that Mark was written first, and it was decades later.
Oh, dude, you want to hear something better?
Decades.
Something better / worse? The pastor of my church, for growing up and then also later in life, they both taught that the Gospels were 4 independent sources written by eyewitnesses, and they were independent. So we had 4 eyewitness accounts talking about the life of Jesus, written by people who were there at the time. And that's why we should trust them. Fuck the fact, that actually they were written in advanced Greek and likely way out of Judea. And also decades after the fact, and also they're anonymous in our earliest sources. Actually, no, it's totally fine. They're all written by independent eyewitnesses who were actually exactly like me and broke ass bitches who spoke basic Aramaic. Come on, what are likely illiterate.
That's then the other part, is because I was like, even if that was the case, even if he really wrote it 4 years later, that doesn't make what he wrote in it true. That doesn't make the claims true. Literally, the 4 Gospels could be 4 independent.
Listen. There was 500 people that saw Jesus.
Okay.
And
4 people wrote down that 500 people saw Jesus.
500 people. You know what I mean? And you can ask Mike Lacona about that.
That was the thing that it was Trump supporters are still, you know, like, I mean, not all of them, but like they're still convinced that Trump won the election. And how
That's
many
because
of them
none of
wrote
them can
about
do
it,
math.
right? It's
Yeah,
just
like 3 = 1. We talked about
Yeah,
this early
You
on.
took the joke
you know,
right out. I was about to make a Trinity joke, but you
You
beat
know?
me to
Sorry.
it.
Okay. I feel like
okay.
I am
We do have a
greatly
few questions.
enjoying this
Oh, yeah, so.
conversation. Just FYI, greatly enjoying it. Could talk forever, but trying to be considerate of the fact that while it's not 8 p.m. for me here, y'all are like, it's very late for you. So first off, I want to say I am happy to have any of these conversations to any degree at any time moving forward. So please always feel like this is an open platform, because I have learned a lot. I've enjoyed this, and I'm always open to learning and understanding in new and better ways. And also, I can just like make fun of people while we do it. So like, I'm here for it.
Nice. I
That
think
being
Oprah calls
said,
that empowerment or something.
sorry, what?
I think Oprah calls that empowerment or something.
I will always punch up. That's all I'm saying. But all of that on the table, I do want to make sure y'all got to bed at a reasonable time. And we have question and answer. So I would like to spend at least the next little bit allowing questions for the host. I think we have 6 that are saved. If anybody else wants their questions answered, please post them now or forever hold your motherfucking peace. Because, I mean, it is what it is. So I think, again, I know we don't have a hard stop time. I don't want to keep you much longer than like 8:20 my time, which would be, I think, 11:20 y'all's time.
Yep.
So if you haven't asked your question, do it now, and pray to me that it gets answered. But otherwise, we're gonna start with what's in the hopper for Ben, and go from there.
Okay, so the problem of evil versus problem of pain versus problem of imperfection, different sides of the same 3-sided die maybe, but seems to be a distinction with a conceptual difference, no?
What up, Adam?
So that depends. So those 5 distinctions that I laid out will largely determine how we analyze each of those considerations, because we might say that, look, pain is evil, and that evil is an imperfection. So in that sense, we're not using them synonymously, because pain is an action. Pain is an experience, whereas evil is a normative property that we attribute to pain. And an imperfection is a judgment about that feature's relation to the totality of the world. So the theist might have an out in saying, look, God can allow certain imperfections here and there if they contribute to the value of the organic whole. But something like the problem of pain, like the distribution of pain in the universe or the biological role of pain, is going to be an observation of evil that we can use as evidence as one of the imperfections of the world that counts against, that's in tension with the perfection of God.
And there you have it. Next. Oh, same. Adam, madam.
Ready. So natural theology is the fatalist,
determinist, Luther and or Calvin position just excluded. Excuse my talking over.
That's okay.
Just excluded. So I might be misunderstanding what they're asking here, but no, the Calvinist position. So fatalist, determinist. Those are terms will need some unpacking because they're not the same thing. So determinism is the idea that all events have a sufficient antecedent cause. So cause and effect is this unbroken chain through time. Fatalism is this idea that we can't that the future is inevitable. So the most common example used is Oedipus. And so the idea of, he's fated to, kill his father and marry his mother. And then nothing he does.
Gouged out his own eyes. What up, Oedipus?
Yeah. And so that's fatalism. So a lot of people think that determinism implies fatalism. Other people disagree. But in the context of this discussion, the worry is theological fatalism. What I described earlier of, look, if God knows all, future events and has providential control, sovereign providential control over all of creation, how is it that we can be free in any sense? Because it seems like God just determines what our actions are. And indeed, that's the traditional Calvinist conclusion, is that, look, like, no, we don't have free will. Like, God determines everything. He's entirely sovereign over creation. This makes the problem of evil that much harder to solve, because the non-Calvinist has free will on the table to at least put forward a free will theodicy. That's just not on the table for the Calvinists. They have to have some sort of compatibilist view where God determines all of our actions, but that's compatible with God punishing us. I don't think it's excluded from the conversation. It's just the less plausible, like, as if theism wasn't already implausible. Calvinist theism is just that much more implausible.
Dude, Calvinism and Calvinists drive me nuts. And that's saying something, because like base level Christians drive me nuts. And so when you get to the point where you're like, everything is predetermined, and also like you can only ever turn to God if he calls you, but also you will never have any choice but to turn to God if he calls you. It's like, what the fuck are y'all talking about? Like, like what do y'all believe? Because this is just, it's nonsensical at a certain point where it's like, do you believe in free will? No, yes, maybe, kind of, okay. And also the fact that most Calvinists, it's wild to me how aggressively against any kind of reformation they are, when their entire fucking branch is based on reformation.
A reformation.
Yeah, like, I don't. Okay. In any event, I will digress, because I could talk about these bozos forever. I hope that answered the question. I wouldn't know because I'm an idiot. Next up, question for the host. If we come from a perspective that God doesn't exist, how do we assign value to a human life? Who assigns that value? And can that value be revoked? So I think I'm the host, but I think that I want Ben to answer. Just like, my answer will be incredibly straightforward, and I think this person already knows what it is.
Yeah. So I'll give my answer. So I believe that there's at least two features of us that make us valuable as human lives. And one is our conscious point of view, the fact that we can be harmed, and the fact that we are rational, the fact that we can respond to reasons, and we can be coerced, we can be lied to, we can be cheated. These are ways in which we have value, and no one assigns that value. Like, to ask who assigns that value is like, asking, well, who picked the prime numbers?
Right.
That's just not how that works. It's
well,
just,
like, also, if someone says life is valuable, which, like, I agree, life is valuable. According to who? Right.
So it's not. So it's not according to anyone. That's the.
Right.
So that's the. So we have to start somewhere with our values, in the sense of there's certain values that we're going to take as primitive. We value evidence. Evidence is valuable. If someone says evidence is valuable, there's really no argument that you can give to them to say, look, you should care about evidence. Evidence is something that matters. Similarly, pain is bad. Pain is something that we should care about. Happiness is also something that we should care about, because it's good. And no one assigns that any values. That value can't be revoked, but it can be ignored. We can respond to things in the wrong ways. But I also don't think that the value of these things are, to use the jargon, are contingent. I think they're necessary. Contingent meaning they could have been otherwise. So there's no possible world in which pain is in itself good. There's no possible world in which I have reason to hold my hand over a hot stove for the sensation of agony in itself. That's just not a possible world.
What if you like it?
Well, then it's pleasure. It's not pain.
Sorry, that was just a bad joke. Okay, it's allergy season here, so forgive me because I've been sneezing just like
I'm there too. I took a
intensely.
Benadryl about an hour
dude.
before this.
I
Anticipating.
really thought I had COVID for a hot second, but no, it turns out I just have allergies and I sneeze aggressively. Okay, so I hope that answered the question. Next up, we have at Heathen Queen. It's not me, it's you. If a God exists, wouldn't he transcend morality, seeing as morality is a phenomenon that arises in social animals and doesn't exist outside of that plane?
No. No. I think morality has to be like God can't transcend morality because God is himself perfectly good, morally perfect. So
did he not create morality?
No, I don't think so. I don't think he can create morality any more than he could create mathematics. So these are like created again, presupposes contingency. This idea that it could have been otherwise or not at all. I think that basic moral truths, like basic mathematical truths, are just necessary truths. They just could not have been otherwise. And so to say like, yes, we have social capacities that have risen over the course of evolution, but we think that they, our mathematical intuitions came about the same way, but they have a subject matter that is independent of their evolutionary process. So I think that morality has to transcend God if you want to make any coherent sense of
how can there be an objective morality if it doesn't?
Exactly. So yeah, if you're saying that God depends on God, if you're saying morality depends on God, then you're saying morality depends on a subject. That's subjectivism. That's not objectivism. I feel like I have to make that point quite often with apologists, and they'll go, no, it's a form of objectivism. I'm like, no, it's very clearly a form of subjectivism.
Is it though? Is it? Yeah, please tell me more.
And so there's a famous philosophical dialogue from Plato called the Euthyphro. And so the Euthyphro is basically asks a question. Let's suppose that morality depends on God. Is God's moral commandments or moral nature the way it is by his fiat, or does he have some reason for it to be that way? If it's by his fiat, then morality could just be anything. God could command us to eat our own children. But if there's a reason why God's nature is some way rather than another, or he commands something to us rather than, well, it's that reason that's the moral feature. It's the moral reason, not God, that is making something morally relevant. And so I think that's just a decisive argument against theologically based ethics. Morality is reason implying, not God implying.
The more you know. I would say, I hope that answers the question. And I certainly hope it does, but I wouldn't know. So, next question. Why would God design the human body with imperfections? People have wisdom teeth that can't emerge because our jaws are too small. Now, I'm going to let Ben answer this. I do want to say from a very, very, very basic Christian understanding is that because of original sin, if you believe in evolution, it's fundamentally flawed. And so these sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Evolutionary anomalies, or whatever you want to call them, are a direct result of this weird sin idea. And it doesn't make sense. I'm not saying it should make sense. What I am saying is that growing up, this is what I was taught, was that and I've talked about this many times and I'll talk about it again. There was girl who is now a woman growing up in my church who had been a wheelchair user pretty much, I think, her entire life. I think since birth. I could be wrong. And because I grew up in a very charismatic church, they believed that she needed healing. Like, it needed to be corrected instead of just accepting that she was a whole person, good as is, that used a wheelchair to exist in life more successfully. And so again, there is a large degree of ableism in the charismatic church. That's what I can say from my experience. That they will say is a direct result of original sin. And this is very much an argument that's used for eugenics. And nobody wants to hear that. It's a shitty argument. I get it. But like, conservative Christians don't believe that God designs human bodies with imperfections. They believe that God's design is for every person to be a fully able-bodied cishet white person. And that because Eve ate the apple, deformations exist. And then I will let Ben take it from there.
Yeah, so I will go ahead.
I'm going to turn my light on. Sorry, but please go ahead.
Answer straightforwardly in the sense that I don't know. I don't like when you ask me like why would God create a human body with imperfections? I don't know. I don't think there's a very good answer to that question, and that's exactly why I think that the argument from imperfection has so much force to it. So I'll borrow from David Hume. So David Hume is one of my favorite philosophers, and his work, Dialogues Concerning Natural Religion, is something of a Rosetta Stone for philosophy for me. That's kind of like where I dived in, and I thought it was the most brilliant thing I'd ever read. And it's only like 50 or 70 pages, depending on which version of it you get. But he makes this point in the Dialogues in a very famous passage where he says, if I showed you a house or palace where there wasn't one convenient or agreeable apartment, where the windows, doors, fireplaces, passages, stairs, and the whole arrangement of the building were the source of noise, confusion, fatigue, darkness, and the extremes of heat and cold, you would certainly blame the planning of the building without any further examination. It would be no use for the architect to display his subtlety and to prove to you that if this door or that window were altered, something worse would follow. What he says may be strictly true. It may be that it would only make things worse to alter one detail while leaving the other parts of the building unchanged. But you would still say in general that if the architect had had skill and good intentions, he could have planned the whole building and the interrelated parts in such a way as to remedy all or most of these inconveniences. His ignorance of such a plan, even your own ignorance of such a plan, will never convince you that it is impossible. If you find any inconveniences and defects in the building, you will always straight off condemn the architect. And so for those of you who haven't read David Hume, he's just a fantastic writer. He's such a joy to read. And I think he's exactly right in this passage. He said, look, we observe bodies with imperfections in them. And what is our immediate judgment here? It's to condemn the architect. The architect, like, if we're supposing there is a God, that God is directly responsible for those disabilities. And we are right to condemn the architect for creating beings with such imperfections. And that's the force driving the argument from imperfection.
Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. I asked you in the private chat, but do you like Kierkegaard?
Yes. So, yeah. But he's on the other side of this. But Kierkegaard and Nietzsche are quite big figures for me. I've got Fear and Trembling somewhere over here.
Yeah, I've always found. So I really enjoyed reading Kierkegaard because I didn't realize. So that was actually part of my deconstruction. Was I didn't realize that someone could be a nihilist and a theist at the same time.
Yeah.
You know,
it's kind of weird. Yeah, it's kind of weird.
I became a nihilist before I became an atheist. But
he's considered like the father of existentialism for that reason. Is that it's just this idea that you start from it's essentially a nihilist position, and then leap into faith.
And that was the so I saw this YouTube video that was comparing the nihilism in BoJack Horseman versus the nihilism in Rick and Morty, and it was talking about like the difference in philosophies between like existential nihilism and cosmic nihilism, and and it was really interesting.
And Rick and Morty employs a lot of Camus themes of the absurdism, the idea that like it's not just that the world is meaningless, it's that we have this drive to see a meaningless world as meaningful, and so we're just always destined to push the rock up the hill like Sisyphus and just roll back down.
Yeah, and that was interesting because like the person that I spoke, like the friend that I have that is a cosmic nihilist, like whenever we talk about like, oh, and life is pain and it's meaningless, and she's like, well, I don't think it's meaningless. I think that there's pain, like the pain is what gives us meaning. So like literally thinking that like the suffering in the world is what causes meaning, and I'm like, oh, okay.
I have something of I'm not going to say it's a similar view, but it's a related view that I think it's the knowledge of our death that gives us our life meaning. It's the fact that we know that we're going to die that motivates us to do the projects that we do and, cherish the things that we have because we recognize not only our finitude, but their finitude as well.
Not finitude.
Alrighty, so we got a couple more questions. I also agree that Rick and Morty is their modern gurus.
What up, psilocybin vibe? FYI, I have shrooms in my cabinet. All right, moving on. I live in California. They're decriminalized. Don't at me.
I know. It was like you're one of the only like places in the country where it's decriminalized.
Yeah. It might be like financially impossible to live here, but at least the drugs aren't criminalized. You know what I mean?
All right. So, okay. So I have a more serious question and then like a silly question. So
we love it.
I like both.
Okay. We'll start with the.
He's not. Oh, sorry. Continue.
All right. This is your show. I'm gonna have you read the question.
Oh, you hit it.
Okay. Why is God necessary in modern times? I can understand its need when we knew nothing about anything, but now that we know, why even bother about an antiquated concept called God? Indoctrination.
Power.
Because it wasn't always about explanations of the world. So religion almost certainly was selected for by evolution. We have religious beliefs for survival reasons. And now I think there's still a lot of work to be done to figure out what that's about. I think it's probably too quick to say that religion will die off. Religion is going to evolve. The God concept is going to fall away. Something is going to replace it. I don't know what that something looks like, but people still need the community.
Comforting answers.
Yeah, there's the social aspect of it. There's the aesthetic part of it. There's the existential part of it. That's the neat thing about religion, is that all of these different areas of inquiry and forms of life kind of converge on this one topic. And that's why it's, even the question, well, what is religion? Just defining religion is really, really hard because it has all of these complex aspects in it. But if we follow Nietzsche, and God is dead. Like, we don't need God in our models or in our forms of life. If that's the case, the question remains: what replaces it? Like, what comes in? What does that look like? Does it look like a form of humanism? Does that look like some form of patriotism? Does it look like, what does it look like? That's the big question that Nietzsche poses for us. And I'll be honest with you, I just don't have good answers for that. I just don't know. So
in my opinion, if you consider all things equal, there isn't a need for a higher power. And that's a very base level thing. There's tons of debates around that, and I get it. What I think that this higher power argument and why it's so powerful or why it's so compelling is because people use it to appeal to or create a power source that you cannot argue with, right? If you say there's a God who says this,
It's
how do you actually
politically
argue against that?
advantageous to
Yes,
have a God
absolutely.
belief. Yes.
Absolutely. And I think that's what we see with Christian nationalism, right? Like the shit that these
That's
people are
directly
claiming is
appealing
nonsensical.
yes, Christian sentiments. That's directly who that's appealing to, because the idea of a Christian nationalism is an idea of Christianity first, America first, and those are like the two things.
Well,
that
and it's
drive
not
that
just that;
demographic.
it's thinking that Christians should rule everything because God rules everything. So therefore, they are the
Well, it's
special
divinely ordained. Yeah. Well, it's
Yeah.
not that it's just that we rule. Like it's that
Yeah.
God ordains it. Like this is God's plan, and we're mere puppets in a very real sense.
This is fucking idolatry.
Yeah.
Here's the short version. Like what you're saying is 100% right, and I don't mean to cut you off at the knees because like you are right, and Christians do believe that. But I constantly feel compelled to remind folks that like this belief system is fundamentally opposed to the Bible, or at least to Jesus, right? Like
Certain
Jesus
features
said,
of him for sure.
Sure, lay down your life, lay down your rights. Like I don't think that that's incredibly hard to miss, but I do understand why it is missed because I grew up in this environment, and so you will, or we did, sort of twist ourselves into hermeneutic pretzels. You know what I mean? To avoid doing the things that Jesus actually said we should do, and instead manipulated the Bible, especially the New Testament, to, first of all, engage in wild anti-Semitism, but at the same time, argue that it is America first somehow. And the fact that people still tell me, that like America is in the Bible, send help.
Yeah, the Book of Mormon.
SOS. It's not even the Book of Mormon.
No. I've heard someone say, I remember there's a TikTok that went around that like a guy was saying that that the America is in the Book of Daniel because it references an eagle. Like,
I'm gonna go die.
Yeah, and then someone said that on TikTok to you recently that it's in Revelation, right?
Oh my god, this fucking dude was like, you don't understand the prophecies and Revelations. And I was like, well, first of all, the book is called Revelation. But hit me up later.
That's a bold book to appeal to.
Right, like maybe just hit me up after you've learned the name of the book, and then we can continue this conversation. No, fuck me, right? Anyway, sorry, I've digressed. I don't know how to do anything but digress.
I do think because we just have a couple of questions left, and it's almost like 11:30 Eastern time. So I'm in Central time, but like I just want to be respectful of other people's time.
Please. So, I'm so sorry, Ben. I've just enjoyed this conversation so much.
It's been great.
I have too. This is my escape. So this has been great.
Yeah, like if there's, just as a note, if there's another point in time where we can do something like this, even at a reduced level, like I am 100% excited and willing about doing that. So let's do it. But for the rest of the Q&A, fine. Just kidding.
Okay, so got.
Oh yes, what up, Florida Line?
Florida Line.
I stand Florida Line in this house.
Right?
FYI, yes.
Well, I was telling Jess, I was like, how there's like the Twitter words are hard. The Twitter account of like conservative cell phone. I was like, there needs to be one for apologists. And she was like, do you follow Florida Line?
Yeah, it's Florida Line.
I do now.
Yeah. Ben, are you familiar with Florida Line? Just out of curiosity.
I'm sorry, say again?
Oh, are you familiar with Florida Line?
I'm not.
Oh, enjoy. their entire presence on social media is to sort of track bullshit apologetics. And they have done an amazing job of being like, here's a Randall Rouser tweet from 2016, and here's his tweet from today. Analyze.
Or they'll like contradict themselves, or like go back on their point, or say the opposite thing.
They don't attack in the way that I do. Not at all. They simply present the evidence, and I live for it. That's all. Hi, Zenny. But sorry, Ben, can you please describe meticulous providence? Because I certainly cannot.
Yeah, so as far as I understand it, I've seen it used a couple times, and in the context, there's a famous formulation of the argument from evil that goes, if God exists, then gratuitous evils would not exist. Gratuitous evils exist, therefore God doesn't exist. And so what's a gratuitous evil? And so a gratuitous evil is an evil that a perfect being wouldn't have any justifying reason for allowing. And so meticulous providence is the thesis that, look, God does allow unjustified evils. That he had, like, his providence is meticulous in the sense that his providence focuses on all the things he cares about, and then everything else just kind of happens. It's just, it doesn't have some greater reason, and it just it's just gratuitous. And so it's trying to, because the premise that seems indubitable in that argument is that if there's a God, there wouldn't be unjustified evils. Like, why would a being with power and motivation to prevent evil just allow it to be gratuitous?
Asking for a friend.
Yeah, and so all the real focus has been trying to deny that second premise, that there are gratuitous evils. So this meticulous providence is kind of one of the go against the grain. You know, everyone concedes that first premise, but the person who puts forward meticulous providence is really trying to challenge that first premise, and I don't think it works. I think that gratuitous evils just really are incompatible with a perfect being.
Yeah, I agree. I also
if they had another concept of meticulous providence in mind, I apologize.
Yeah. I just want to send my hellos to Ben's cat specifically. That's all.
That's a very vocal cat.
I mean, y'all can probably hear my
Sweet
dog
potato
pawing at the door.
What are you
assholes.
doing?
Yeah.
All right. So, all right. I think this is our last question, but it's got two questions: a silly question and a serious question.
Oh God. I assume this is for Ben only because that's a silly question for me.
So, Marvel movies, DC comics. So that's my answer.
That's fair.
What are those? Just kidding.
So, I was like, oh man, okay, well let's.
Sorry.
Let's fucking
I've got a lot of Marvel movies to cover. Let's get started now.
What have I watched? The only thing that I have watched recently, and I'm going to forget. Jesus God, I already forgot. My sister made me watch it over like some holiday. Oh fuck me. Yeah, well, that about sums it up because I don't remember what it was. It was some monster that I was like, okay, makes sense.
So my favorite debate was last August. I was invited to Houston, Texas to debate Trent Horn of Catholic Answers on the existence of God. And
Fucking
so he's a Catholic apologist.
I'm sorry.
No, you're good. He's a Catholic apologist, and he's really well read in Catholic apologetics.
Yeah, he is. He also cried when I told him to fuck himself over his stance on Roe versus Wade. So that's all I have to say.
Yeah.
But yes, shout out to
you
for your
but
work,
in person, I got to have a debate with Trent Horn, and I thought it was a really good debate in the sense that we were both very civil. We put a lot of very substantive arguments on the table, and it was a really good discussion.
I'm so glad that both of us exist.
Both sides of the spectrum. I think probably the favorite debate I've seen recently was so Heathen Queen is a part of Unholy Trinity. And if any of you saw the debate between Jagazus and Red Sage about the Apostle Paul, where everybody got super drunk and then like Andrew would not stop talking about like whale penises. It's like
My life is a whole mess. It's a mess.
Interesting.
Yeah.
like
It was a downhill spiral. It had nothing to do with Paul. I'm like,
I don't know how you go up from whale penis.
Nobody does. Well, I can tell you how whale penises go up, but yeah.
He was like, but guys, like so many sea monsters are based off this. Like they didn't know what they were looking at.
You thought you were coming on this show for like intelligent discourse, but no, not I.
I'm here for it.
We're talking about whale dick. To be honest, okay, if I'm being very, very honest, and I'm not sure this question was directed exactly at me, I actually hate debates. I really dislike them, largely because I think that neither side, atheist, theist, however you want to define it, nobody is coming to learn anything. They're simply coming to present their stance and then argue against whatever the fuck the other person brings up. And I'm not saying that's bad. Like, I'm not saying that's bad. I'm just saying I don't enjoy it and I don't watch them because for me personally, if I'm going to spend the time and energy and prep to engage with someone that believes fundamentally differently than I do, I want to be on a, for lack of a better term, a level with them in which we are both actually open and trying to learn, or at least being
open. You want to dialogue with them rather than debate.
Exactly.
Yeah, I totally know what you mean.
Yeah, so like if people ask me all the time, like, why don't you debate with other people? And I was like, I don't know, because I literally have anything better to do with my time, including chopping my own toenails and throwing them out the window. Like, that's not to say that nobody should debate.
I gotta go take a shower. I can't.
Yeah, go. I'm not saying that like
no, that was a joke. Being like, I can't debate.
Sorry.
I gotta go take a shower.
I'd literally rather just like wash my ass. But like, it's not that nobody should do it. I think it's valuable to some people. But if you're gonna ask me like what my favorite debate is, like, I don't like them. Yeah, I don't like them. Like, even watching.
What's your favorite vaccine?
Exactly. Like, they all suck. They all hurt. I have a reaction to every single one of them. Like, I don't know. But even watching like Lacona and Ehrman do that like 8-hour debate, the only person I was there to support was Megan. The rest, like the rest of the argument
was a disaster too. Like.
I didn't watch it. Once I saw that it was 8 hours, I was like, y'all are out of your mind. I'm not watching that.
Yeah, like 8 hours on something that's been debated for like 500 years, and there's been no new arguments.
I wish I was more interested in those discussions than I am. I'm just not.
So bad.
Like, we're really going to debate whether or not a human being came back from the dead. Please catch me next time.
Using historical methods.
Right.
Yeah.
It's impossible.
And
we're going to overturn our scientific understandings of the laws of nature because of historical methods.
This is probably like I'm going to probably get some hate for it because I think that Bart Ehrman is brilliant, but I don't think he debates very well. I think he purposely debates people that are not on match with him so that because like...
Oh, dude, I would do the same thing. Hear me out on this. If people that I thought were an easy win wanted to debate me and I would make money off that, the fuck I look like?
I mean, but
a dummy? Like,
you know, like that could be like your whole business. Like you could like retire on that, right? You could be like, come debate me, and then like
debate me, bro. Debate me, then pay me.
Oh, no. It will be payment. Up front.
We'll go from there.
Yeah. But yeah, so like I think Bart Ehrman is incredibly smart. I do credit a lot of my early deconstruction. Like, I certainly had the ideas before him, but he reinforced them in a lot of ways, and so like I will be forever grateful.
Well, he's also like the gold standard in biblical scholarship. Like when you go to like a
yes,
take a class and you have a textbook on a survey
yes.
of historical New Testament, he's the guy who wrote the book.
Oh, absolutely. And there's two things, right? One, he's made scholarship pop culture, which I think is incredibly important because that's
hard.
It's fucking hard, and like I'm trying to do some degree of that with my channel. Obviously, I'm not a scholar. I'm not the one doing the sort of like alchemy, but I'm trying to bring people that are very smart about very specific topics and present them to people who don't know anything about them in a way that is accessible, right?
Yeah.
That being said, like, yeah, so that's my sort of goal. I also think that I lost my train of thought on that second part, so never mind. Yeah, I think that like
story of my life.
Yeah, dude, I take a lot of Adderall, and at night it still doesn't help.
My ADHD is really bad, but I'm currently unmedicated.
Yeah, like during the day,
I'm unmedicated too. I've been off meds for way too long.
And I'm literally only able to do it because I can afford to pay at this moment a lot every month. And that's not like a flex. That's like a capitalist fuck off because that sucks.
Yeah.
But yeah, like Bart was a big part of my deconstruction. He made scholarship very accessible. I'm trying to do the same thing in some ways, but that doesn't mean that he's untouchable. It doesn't mean that he can't be criticized. It doesn't mean
I don't think anyone should be untouchable.
No, nobody should be untouchable.
Your skepticism flag should be thrown when someone thinks or claims someone is untouchable.
That being said, if y'all dummies want to debate me and pay me to debate you, just hit my Calendly. It's time for y'all. In any event, what other questions do we have now that I've completely derailed this?
That was the last question. Was there a Christian page or show that I was talking about?
I don't think it was Christian. I think it was the Unholy Trinity.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I think that's what it was.
So it's the Unholy Trinity. I am the producer, and then our lovely Heathen Queen, and then there's Jagazis and Red Sage. And
sometimes I host. All right. That all being said, I want to say, first of all, thank you all so much for being here, for supporting the first live. It was a little bit last minute, and also I'm not really sure what I'm doing, so I just want to say thanks for the support.
I think it went great.
I loved it personally. All of that being said, Ben, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us. I personally have learned a ton, and so I imagine that other people have learned a ton as well. I would be ecstatic to have you on again and discuss literally anything that you know about that you're interested in, because I have a feeling I probably don't know about it. And I could learn a whole bunch.
I would love to see you and Shane the Skeptic have a discussion. That would be amazing.
Yeah, you didn't hear this from me, but I might have a show upcoming called like Queen and the Shanes, and he might be a part of that. I don't know. Never me.
I'd love to. Just
Queen
of
the Shanes?
Queen and the Shanes.
Oh, gotcha.
You know what I mean? Yeah. But Ben, my sincerest gratitude and thanks. I know that we sort of come from different sides of the aisle, and it has meant the world to me that you have sort of maintained a relationship and have been supportive of the way that I do things, even if it's in a tacit way. And I hope that you know that I also am incredibly supportive and grateful for the work that you do. All of that being said, please tell the people where they can find you, how they can support you, what's next for you.
Yes, so you can find Real Atheology, a philosophy of religion podcast, anywhere that you can find podcasts. We're on YouTube, we're on Apple podcasts, we're on Podbean,
Spotify doing the thing.
Yeah, Spotify. My next it won't be a debate, it'll be more of a discussion, but it will be on June 20th. I will be discussing the question of abortion from an applied ethics point of view with Jamie Jeffries. She is pro-life and I am pro-choice. And so I'll basically just be laying out the philosophical case for being pro-choice.
Where can I spend my money? Because anyway,
Yeah.
Sorry.
I know that's not at all a controversial
not
topic
even a
right
little
now.
bit. Yeah. Totally fine and normal. That all being said, I will be. No, this isn't relative to you at all. I will be on the line this Sunday with Johnny Angel. So call, tell us why you believe in a God. I'll also likely be on the nonprofits coming up in the next couple of weeks. I don't know what we'll be discussing, but I'm sure it'll be incredibly fun. I will be on Vice Rhino's channel next Thursday, or I guess this coming Thursday, and I will be on your Friendly Neighborhood Atheist channel next Tuesday. I don't know what days those are. I'll have to post them.
And then,
but just so you know, keep an eye out.
She will also be at Better, which is the atheist conference.
How could I forget?
I'm
literally the only person on the panel.
No, you're not. There's like a list of people.
Speech by me personally. Some people that aren't going.
Well, like Jagazus is going, and so is.
I don't think he is.
Is he not? I thought he was.
I didn't think he was. I'll have to double check. I didn't think he was.
He's
and also Rion.
He's in the LGBTQ plus panel and the TikTok panel.
Well, I didn't see an LGBTQ plus panel, so maybe I'm just dumb, but I didn't see it. It might be there. My opinion means nothing. I did not think Jagazus is going, but if he is, can't wait to meet him. Even though we do a podcast together every week. Biddy, I think, is trying to go. Doesn't have a plan yet. Rion is not going, and I am the only one with the ticket. So, if y'all don't show up, I'm just going to lecture everyone on why I am as abrasive as I am. So donate to your favorite creators so that I don't have to do that. Thank you so much for coming to my TED Talk. It's for real. And on that note, I think that's everything. Please like, subscribe. Please go follow Ben. Please go follow the Atheology podcast. Please go follow Ryan. I will say this in closing. Even though I have an incredibly abrasive and very different way of dealing with people than Ben and Ryan do, both of them have consistently engaged me with, I don't even know a better word, in ways that it has been obvious that they respect me and my opinion, and the fact that they are just trying to reach a different group of people or more people. And while that will never be me personally, it takes all people, and I am so grateful that y'all exist. And that's what I would say.
You are very needed as well. Like, I can say as someone who, you know, like when you grow up in evangelical circles where like you're supposed to always turn the other cheek and just let people walk all over,
especially as a woman. Yeah.
Right. As like but then like, you know, like I've had a lot of bullying in my life, and like, you know, and like, so to see someone who is just being like, hey, like, because like the thing is, if you've never been anything but kind to me. You've never been anything but kind to like the people who aren't just bigoted assholes. If they are a bigot, you call it out unapologetically, and it is just like it makes my heart sing. So
I haven't talked about this yet. I've talked about a lot of the reasons that I am the way I am or why I do what I do. But one of the major reasons is that I want people to know that when folks are punching down on them, even if they dress it up, even if they shine up that shit, right? Like, you're still within your rights to be angry and disrespectful to people that don't value you as equally human, regardless of how they dress it up. And again, I think it takes all kinds, right? This is a great example. Like, I will come in like a fucking wrecking ball, ruin some people's day, And then people like Josh Bowen will come in behind me and talk to these people and say, like, yeah, you respect me as a scholar, as a person, as a man, and here's why actually she's right, and here's why you need to consider what you're saying and what she's saying. It takes all kinds, and I'm gonna say this until I fucking die. But I think that it's very important to realize that, like, we're not diametrically opposed, right? Like, I am incredibly grateful for the way that you all do things. I think it's important. I think it doesn't need to change. I think it's valuable. And I don't think it detracts in any way from the way that I address things. I think it takes all kinds. It takes someone with social currency to explain, and then it takes someone else to when you're fucking up immediately.
And it's important to have like the variations, because like I can just think of, like, right off the top of my head, Eve Was Framed on TikTok. Oh God, she's like I don't know how to, she's like the Mary Poppins of atheist activists, like she's like
so nice.
She's so, like she has some bite to her, but like she is just like, she's the kindest atheist.
It's always funny when people are like, you're a succubus, and I'm like, she is? Really? In any event, sorry, I don't mean to end this. I don't mean to cut you off. I think you're right. Eve is sweet. So is who am I thinking of? I just totally forgot. Yes, incredibly sweet, patient, kind, and you know what? They get treated with more vitriol than I do. It takes all kinds, but also instilling a little bit of fear into folks is not the worst thing you could ever do. Yeah, amen, my brothers in Christ. All right, so on that note, not to cut it off, but I really do want to let y'all get to bed, because I know it's not that late for me, but it is for y'all. Thank you so much for being here, Ben. Thank you for co-hosting, Correa. I am so grateful for y'all. I would love to do something like this again. I'm not just saying that. Truly, I would. Thank you for making my first live so memorable and important. And for those of you watching, if you haven't already, the fuck, like, subscribe, send me cookies in the mail. I don't know. Do whatever you do so that we can do more of this, because I think it's valuable and important, and I like doing it. And on that note, I'll see y'all next time.